It all began 6 months earlier when Laura first crossed paths with Pete at a professional networking event hosted by a local marketing firm. Laura, an ambitious project manager at a real estate firm, was immediately drawn to Pete's easy charm and quick wit. Their conversation flowed effortlessly, sparking a connection neither had expected. By the end of the evening, they had exchanged numbers under the guise of sharing industry insights. The messages started innocuously enough, brief exchanges about work, shared interests, and jokes about the dullness of corporate life. But over time, the messages grew more personal. Pete revealed he felt trapped in a stagnant marriage, and Laura confided about feeling underappreciated at home. These shared frustrations drew them closer, and soon, the line between casual friendship and emotional closeness blurred. Laura's life at home, though stable, had long felt devoid of excitement. Her husband, David, was kind and reliable, but preoccupied with managing their household and raising their 3 children. Their once passionate relationship had settled into a predictable routine, leaving Laura yearning for something more. Her guilt over these feelings was eclipsed by the exhilaration of her growing bond with Pete. Pete, a sales executive with a magnetic personality, often shared tales of his younger, carefree days traveling the world. These stories captivated Laura, fueling her fantasies of an adventurous life beyond her suburban existence. Pete suggested a trip to Bali, a place he described as magical and transformative. Though hesitant at first, Laura found herself unable to resist the allure of the escape he painted so vividly. As their plans took shape, Laura devised a cover story to ensure her family remained unsuspecting. She told her husband she was attending an out-of-state training workshop and arranged for her children to stay with her in-laws. The meticulous planning brought an unexpected thrill, making the trip feel even more like a forbidden adventure. The night before their departure, Laura sat alone in her home office, staring at a draft of a letter she had written to her husband. It was meant to soften the blow if he ever discovered the truth. The letter spoke of her deep love for him and their family, but hinted at her longing for personal growth and independence. She hesitated before sealing it in an envelope and slipping it under his pillow. Little did she know, this single act would set a chain of events in motion that neither she nor Pete could control. Laura and Pete were seated together in the bustling airport lounge, waiting to board their flight to Bali. After weeks of meticulous organizing and mounting excitement, their long-anticipated getaway was finally underway. Laura, her energy drained from the late-night packing, shut her eyes while holding Pete's hand. The prospect of 2 weeks of relaxation and indulgence seemed like the perfect retreat. Their calm was disrupted by the ding of Pete's phone. As he glanced at the screen, he casually reminded Laura, "Don't forget to put your phone on airplane mode." "I didn't bring it," she said, shrugging off the remark. Pete's expression suddenly tightened as he read a message on his phone. "Peter Auer. Just touch that woman and you'll regret it for the rest of your life." Alarmed, Laura noticed his reaction. "What's wrong?" she asked. Instead of answering, Pete handed her the phone. "Pete, you're unbelievable," Laura said, exasperated. "You should have warned your wife." "She already knows," Pete admitted, attempting to downplay the situation. He explained that he had told his wife he was attending a 2-week training course and packed while she was asleep. "No one could possibly know about us," he reassured her. "Are you certain?" Laura pressed, doubt creeping into her voice. "Yes," Pete insisted, though his eyes darting around the room betrayed his unease. He suggested they check in with their respective partners to ensure everything was fine. Pete called his wife, but the call went unanswered, forcing him to leave a breezy voicemail. Laura, however, declined to contact her husband. Their conversation was cut short by the boarding announcement. As they joined the line, the earlier closeness between them had been replaced by a tense silence. Pete continued to scan the crowd, searching for any familiar faces. Once aboard, Laura rested her head on Pete's shoulder, entwining her arm with his. "Why didn't you bring your phone?" Pete asked. "It's part of my plan," Laura said cryptically. "You'll understand soon." After the plane reached cruising altitude, Laura retrieved her laptop, opened a document, and handed it to Pete. "I've been thinking this through," she said. "This letter is for my husband. He'll find it tonight, and it will give him 2 weeks to decide. Depending on his response, this trip could mark a new chapter for us, or a return to the old." The letter read,
"Dear husband, I've loved you deeply for the past 25 years. Our life together, the family we've built, and the bond we share mean everything to me. You've been a wonderful partner, and I am truly grateful for all that we have. but there's something I need to tell you. For years, I've poured myself into our family, rarely asking for anything for myself. Now, I feel the time has come to propose something important. I'm away for 2 weeks, not for work, as I told you, but to reflect. I've left my phone behind because I want you to consider what I'm about to say without distractions or confrontation. I cherish our marriage, but I also find myself longing for experiences that I believe we can navigate together, with your understanding and support. I'm asking for your permission to explore connections outside our marriage. My love for you remains unwavering. You will always be my priority. If you agree, I promise to be discreet and respectful of our relationship. If this ever becomes public knowledge, I'll stop immediately. If you disagree, I will honor your decision, and we'll move forward as we always have. Please take these 2 weeks to think about it. I trust you to decide with the care and love you've always shown me. Whatever your answer, I will respect it. Yours always, Laura.
Pete finished reading and looked up. Wow, Laura smiled. It's good, isn't it? I did borrow a bit of phrasing from a story on an erotic fiction site. Pete raised an eyebrow. You're calling this an investment in your future? Why? It's simple, Laura said. I'm asking my husband for permission to step outside our marriage. If he agrees, I can live without guilt. If he doesn't, well, I'll know where I stand. And, let's be honest, replacing you would be its own challenge. You really think he'll agree? Pete asked skeptically. Absolutely, Laura replied. I framed it as his choice. If he says no, we'll keep sneaking around. If he says yes, it's a win. He'll think he's in control. Pete frowned. It's not logical to him, it's emotional. That letter basically tells him he's not enough. No man wants to hear that. He'll either fight back or fold. You don't know him like I do, Laura said confidently. He values honesty. This is a calculated risk. Pete studied her, unsettled by her cold pragmatism. While he wasn't averse to bending the truth for his own gain, Laura's calculated approach struck him as unnerving. His curiosity got the better of him. So, how did the story you borrowed from end? Did the woman get what she wanted? Laura's expression darkened. No, her husband kicked her out, and she realized she'd made a terrible mistake. Sensing her discomfort, Pete shifted the topic. Speaking of strange things, I saw something weird at the terminal. A guy kept staring at me. When I looked at him, he made a throat-slashing gesture. Freaked me out. Laura raised an eyebrow. What did he look like? Tall, over 6 feet, dark hair, goatee. Just a regular guy, Pete said, shrugging. Laura's expression shifted as she opened her laptop, pulling up a picture of herself standing beside a man in front of a house. Her voice quivered as she asked, Was this the guy you saw? Pete squinted at the image. Maybe. I'm not entirely sure. She scrutinized Pete's face, questioning whether he was being truthful or trying to hide something. Could he be covering up the possibility that her husband had discovered their affair? For the first time, doubt crept in. Pete was unfaithful to his wife. Could he really be trusted? What was he wearing? Laura pressed. Pete shrugged, clearly annoyed. Laura, guys don't pay attention to that kind of thing. Undeterred, she continued. Didn't you say my husband dropped you off at the domestic terminal? Yeah, but I made sure he drove off before I took the bus to the international terminal, Pete replied confidently. He'd have to park, figure out where I went, and track me down through check-in. It's not likely. Despite Pete's reassurances, Laura's unease didn't fade. Sensing her persistence, Pete decided to pivot the conversation. Is that your house in the photo? Laura, momentarily distracted, answered automatically. Yes, that's ours. We bought the land as an investment. It's a steep, narrow beach property. My husband spent over 15 years designing and building it himself, piece by piece. Every room has its own unique mural, nautical designs in the bathrooms, a business motif in the study, even with a creek running beneath the house. He incorporated it into the design. It's won architectural awards. Pete nodded politely, but his thoughts were elsewhere. He couldn't shake the unsettling feeling that someone, maybe Laura's husband, was already one step ahead of them. The conversation meandered to family, a subject they usually avoided. Pete mentioned his 2 kids, ages 6 and 8, while Laura spoke about her 3, Sarah, 23, a newly minted real estate attorney, and her teenage sons, Daniel, 16, and Larry, 13. Still uneasy, Laura tried to refocus. She jotted down a mental checklist. Lawyer, home, kids. Her thoughts raced toward contingency plans, how to protect her family and assets if everything fell apart. The silence between them deepened, and Laura chastised herself for not being more cautious. She replayed the events leading up to their departure. Thursday night, she had meticulously packed for the trip, ensuring her choices matched the cover story of a work conference. Her husband had seemed normal, even affectionate, as they spent the evening together. Friday had followed the usual routine. Laura went to work, arranged for her husband to pick her up since her company car was in for service, and shared lunch with the kids. Later, they dropped the boys at their grandparents' house and spent a quiet evening together. Laura's excitement for the trip had blinded her to any potential red flags. On Saturday morning, she convinced her husband to help her check her bags and leave quickly, a break from his usual habit of lingering. His easy compliance, which had initially relieved her, now felt suspicious. Had he suspected something? Despite her careful planning, Laura clung to the idea that her husband was in the dark. He didn't know her coworkers, and no one from work knew the truth about the trip. Pete's unsettling text? Probably a prank. The man Pete saw at the terminal? Just a stranger with bad manners. She repeated these reassurances to herself. Even if her husband pieced things together, the letter she'd left behind provided plausible deniability. It framed the trip as a getaway with a colleague. Still, Laura felt the need to shore up her defenses. She decided to have Sarah discreetly retrieve the letter she'd left under her husband's pillow. During the flight, Laura drafted a message to her daughter, explaining she'd forgotten her phone at home and needed Sarah to activate Pete's number for contact, claiming she'd purchased a prepaid phone for the trip. Laura also instructed Sarah to find the letter, calling it deeply personal and meant only for her husband. She trusted Sarah's loyalty and discretion. Once they landed in Bali, Laura emailed Sarah and used Pete's phone to call her husband. There was no answer. Hours later, worry gnawed at her as they settled into their hotel. Finally, Sarah called back on Pete's phone, confirming she'd followed her mother's instructions. But she added a troubling detail. Her father had taken Daniel and Larry to the family's remote cabin for the weekend. He'd called her earlier, sounding preoccupied, and said he needed time to think. Sarah planned to join them that evening. Laura froze. Her husband hadn't mentioned going to the cabin, a secluded property without modern communication. The realization left her shaken. She ended the call without asking further questions, unable to process the implications. Meanwhile, her husband at the cabin prepared a barbecue for the kids. They begged him to take them camping the next day to hunt wallabies for stew. Sarah noticed he seemed preoccupied and decided to gently confront him during a family meeting. "Is it about Mom?" Sarah asked. "Yeah," he admitted with a heavy sigh. "She's been acting distant for months. And now, after yesterday and this morning, I've learned a few troubling things." The room was heavy with tension as their father sighed, completing his thought. They'd always seen him as strong and cheerful, rarely this serious. The silence stretched. "Your mom told me she was going on a 2-week work course overseas," he began. The kids immediately replied, "She told us the same thing," he continued. "Yesterday, I picked her up from work. While waiting, I saw her talking to a man in his office. Something about their posture and expressions felt off. She took over 5 minutes to come out. Meanwhile, I saw his photo on the company wall. His name is Peter Auer. I even picked up his business card from the front desk." The children listened intently as he went on. "This morning, I couldn't sleep and looked in your mom's purse. I found her passport and noticed an Indonesian visa stamped 3 weeks ago. I remembered her reading a Bali travel brochure last month." Pausing, he looked at his children before continuing. "Bali is in Indonesia, not interstate. She lied about her destination, but accusing someone you love of cheating without proof is serious." Sarah spoke up. "We understand, Dad. You and Mom taught us to never cheat, never lie, and always respect others." Their father nodded. "That's why this is so hard. This morning, your mom asked me to drop her at the domestic terminal and leave. That was unusual. Normally, I'd stay until her flight departed. So I went to the international terminal instead. I saw Peter Auer checking in, and 15 minutes later, your mom showed up and checked in too. I was too shocked to confront her." Sarah hesitated. "Do you think she's—" "Yes, Sarah," he said heavily. "I believe your mother lied to us and went to Bali for an affair." Turning away, their father tried to mask his pain, but it was obvious. One by one, the kids embraced him, starting with Daniel. Sarah stepped back and looked up at him. "What are you going to do, Daddy?" she asked softly. He sighed heavily. "I don't know yet," he admitted. "If she's been unfaithful, it's over. Fidelity is non-negotiable." Even if she hasn't slept with him, I don't know if I can move past this. For now, I've sent them a message warning there will be consequences if they touch each other. It buys me time to decide." Sarah tilted her head, concern etched on her face. "But Dad, Mom left her phone at home," she said carefully. "She wouldn't have seen your message." Their father's expression darkened as he frowned. "What number did she give you to contact her?" he asked, his tone sharpening. Sarah pulled up Laura's instructions on her phone, read the first 6 digits, and her father completed the last 4 from Peter's business card. This simple act confirmed the truth for everyone in the room. Silence fell. "There's more," Sarah added. "Mom asked me to retrieve a letter from under her pillow and bring it to you." She handed him the letter. After hesitating, he began to read. Larry broke the impasse. "Dad, this is about our family. We make big decisions together. You have to tell us." Moved by his youngest son's determination, Dave read the letter aloud. One sentence in the 3rd paragraph stood out. "I'm going away for 2 weeks with a friend from work. I have never been unfaithful to you, and without your full blessing, I never will be." That single proven lie cast doubt over the entire letter. For the next hour, they debated the situation, analyzing Laura's motives. They reached an unsettling conclusion. Depending on one key detail, Laura might have forfeited her place in the family. Dave tried to defend her. "Kids, if there's a betrayal, it's against me as her husband. Don't let this change how you feel about her." Larry responded firmly. "No, Dad. The moment she lied to all of us, she removed herself from this family." Dave studied his son's resolute face and realized the strength of his convictions. Larry's words carried the weight of truth. At the hotel reception, Laura surprised Pete by requesting a private room on another floor. She booked it for 2 nights with the option to extend, ensuring priority if the room filled up. When Pete questioned her decision, she instructed him to unpack in his room and meet her in the lobby in 2 hours. Embarrassed but compliant, Pete agreed. When they met, Pete couldn't help but admire Laura's striking outfit, momentarily forgetting the odd situation. Their month-long closeness had been limited to kissing and touching, and Pete was eager for more. "What's going on, Laura?" he asked. "Think about it, Pete," Laura said sharply. "We planned this trip together, but you received a threatening message by name, warning you not to touch me. Then a man resembling my husband made a threatening gesture at you. Now my husband isn't answering my calls, which is completely unlike him." Pete grasped the implications, but didn't see how it concerned him. Laura pressed on. "I think there's an 80% chance my husband knows we're here. If he confirms we slept together, my marriage is over, and I'm not ready for that. If he doesn't know, I can't explain coming home early without lying, and after 25 years, he'll spot a lie immediately. Until I confirm he knows nothing, we're not sleeping together." Pete looked disappointed, but Laura waved him off before he could argue. "If you were my husband and suspected me of cheating, how would you handle it?" she asked. "Easy," Pete said. "I'd hire a private investigator." Seeing his realization dawn, Laura added, "Did you try calling your wife since we arrived?" Pete glanced nervously around the lobby as though searching for cameras. Laura said firmly, "Now you get it. Stay away from my room, don't touch me, and notify me immediately if my husband calls. Here's a list of the numbers he might use. Now give me a friendly kiss on the cheek and we'll part for now." Pete complied, and they retreated to their rooms, both wary of being watched. Had either checked the number from Pete's threatening message, they might have realized Laura was already a sufferer of her husband's suspicions. Over the next 4 days, the trip unfolded awkwardly. They ate at the hotel restaurant, avoided physical contact, and spent every day together in case Laura's husband called. Laura dragged Pete to clothing stores and a day trip on Tuesday, though Pete grew increasingly restless. On Monday, she bought a disposable phone and had Pete practice switching to it in case of a suspicious call. Her concern deepened when Sarah stopped responding to emails, though she rationalized that Dave might have extended a trip to their cottage with the kids. By Tuesday night, Pete's patience ran out. He discreetly booked another room, left unnoticed, and spent the night with a Javanese escort. Meanwhile, Laura's anxiety escalated. She stayed in her room researching divorce and emailed the family lawyer for advice. He confirmed her assumptions about a potential divorce, though he admitted it wasn't his specialty. By Friday, convinced her husband knew, Laura took action to secure her family's finances. She instructed her lawyer to lock down assets and transferred ownership of their last vacant property into a trust shared with Sarah. She also set up separate trusts for her 2 younger children, requiring dual signatures, one from the child, valid only when they turned 18, and one from a legal guardian, whom the lawyer recommended be himself rather than Laura. With her family's finances protected, Laura felt a slight sense of relief. If it turned out to be a false alarm, she could undo the changes. That night, she slept more soundly than she had all week. On Saturday, Laura's world unraveled with two devastating revelations in quick succession. First, Pete broke her rules by visiting her room. He confessed that his wife, who had been unresponsive, had asked his brother where to send divorce papers. Pete's wife had discovered he was on annual leave, not a business trip, and confronted him. Pete realized this was how Dave had learned of the trip. He immediately decided to return home to manage the fallout. Laura, shaken, contacted her lawyer to finalize all financial changes. She escorted Pete to the airport and then moved into his now empty room. The second bombshell came from a Facebook post on Larry's account, announcing his parents' divorce. Stunned, Laura screamed, "What's Dave doing?" She reflected bitterly. Divorce, she thought, should involve discussions and explanations, not unilateral declarations. Dave had always supported her career, allowing her to become the breadwinner while he stayed home with the kids. Yet now he was turning the family against her. Laura prayed for a sign to stop her plans before it was too late. As her panic subsided, Laura analyzed the situation rationally. Someone, likely Pete's wife, must have exposed her trip to Dave. If Sarah had disobeyed instructions and shown her father the letter Laura had written, the situation would be even worse. Reading the letter again, Laura saw its flaws, truths mixed with lies, promises that now rang hollow. If Dave had seen it, she realized, he would question everything, including her assurances of fidelity and her praise of him as a lover. Laura's greatest concern was Dave's wounded ego. She hadn't physically betrayed him, but the letter and circumstances suggested otherwise. She clung to the hope that the private investigator's report would confirm her innocence, at least in Bali. Reflecting on her actions, Laura felt a grim irony. She was the archetypal wife who had it all, yet she risked everything for a fleeting desire to rewrite her future. Now, she faced losing her family and still hadn't satisfied her craving. Determined to salvage the situation, Laura made plans to return home early. She wrote a vague letter to Dave, sent through Sarah, hoping to delay any irreversible decisions. She also scheduled an appointment with a marriage counselor. Meanwhile, back home, Sarah overheard Dave talking with their neighbor, John Smith, a lawyer. John asked, "So besides informing Pete's wife, what else have you done, Dave?" "Nothing yet," Dave replied. "I'm waiting to hear what Laura has to say before deciding on divorce." Sarah interjected sharply, "Dad, stop being naive. Mom's lawyer had me sign a trust agreement that effectively removes your control over family assets. She's emptied most of the accounts. She's already making her move against you." Dave listened quietly, his face a mix of hurt and disbelief as Sarah laid bare Laura's apparent betrayal. Sarah handed her father a printed letter from Laura. He read it, then passed it to John.
Dear Sarah, please print the attached document and give it to your father. I trust your discretion not to read it. This is personal between him and me. Dear David, I assume you now know I lied about my trip's purpose and destination. When I return, I hope we can talk, and you'll listen to my apology for the mistake I've made with the patience you've always shown. Please remember two things before doing anything drastic. 1. I love you and only you. Always have and always will. 2. Since we became exclusive, I've been faithful to you. I know my actions have caused doubt, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes to prove my fidelity. Arrange for a lie detector test upon my return and I'll take it, answering any questions you want. After resolving this, I'll apologize for the disrespect you feel I've shown. Please don't do anything rash. Divorce will devastate us both. You'd lose the house you love and half of our early retirement funds. Think about the children. Divorce divides families. Custody battles would hurt us all. Please, give me a chance to explain when I return. Your loving wife, Laura.
After reading the letter, John remarked, "If we didn't know what she's been doing, this letter would seem compelling." Dave furrowed his brow. "What do you mean?" John leaned forward, his tone steady. "Dave, in my line of work, I see these situations all the time. This looks like a textbook case. She wants out, found a replacement, and took him for a test drive on this trip. If he proved suitable, her plan was likely to quietly move assets, poison your relationship with the kids, and file for divorce. Writing a letter like this and letting Sarah see it makes you appear weak, which makes it easier for the kids to side with her. The goal? Leave you penniless and isolated." Dave shook his head. That sounds extreme. John's eyes narrowed. I can prove it. Call 3 top divorce attorneys in town. If any refuse your case, it's likely because she's already hired them. It's a common tactic to prevent them from representing you. Skeptical but willing to try, Dave followed John's advice. He called a top attorney, only to be told they couldn't take his case. Unbeknownst to him, the reason was the firm's heavy workload, not Laura's interference. When Dave returned to the room, he sighed. Okay, John, I believe you. What should I do? John didn't hesitate. First, block all financial accounts she doesn't control and restrict joint spending. Cancel any shared credit cards immediately. Dave paused, conflicted. I still want to believe she loves me, but the second half of her letter doesn't align with that. Sarah, who had been quietly listening, spoke up. Dad, are you sure Mom lied to you? Yes, Dave said, his voice firm. Sarah met his gaze. Do you lie to people you love? No, Dave replied, his tone softening. What are the 3 pillars of a partnership you've always taught us? Love, trust, and respect. How many of those do you still have with her? 1, he admitted. And how much is Mom showing you now? Sarah pressed. None, Dave acknowledged. Exactly, Sarah said, her sarcasm cutting through the room's tension. When Laura tried to pay the fee to change her flight, her credit cards were declined. Panicked, she rushed to an ATM, but her card was also rejected. Realizing she had limited options, she quickly assessed her situation. Her hotel and meals were prepaid, so she wouldn't be left homeless or starving, and she had a few hundred in traveler's checks, though not enough to last. Asking her parents for money would raise questions she wanted to avoid. Laura emailed her lawyer to inquire about the frozen accounts and prepared for a dull, low-budget week before her flight home. Reflecting, Laura wondered how her supposedly foolproof plan had unraveled so quickly. She had assumed Dave wouldn't take drastic action and believed her infidelity would never be discovered. However, her plan had backfired spectacularly. 2 emails deepened her despair. The first, from Pete's wife Riley, accused her of destroying a marriage and jeopardizing the future of Pete's children. The second email, from her daughter Danielle, included one of Laura's letters to Pete with the question, "Why did you lie to us, Mom?" Laura realized her children were now part of her punishment, and Sarah's silence took on a new, troubling meaning. Laura replied to Danielle, promising to explain the misunderstanding upon her return. Danielle's immediate response stung. Strange that you chose to spend our vacation with another man instead of with Daddy and us. Throughout the week, Laura avoided the beach to prevent returning home with a tan that might confirm suspicions. She sent a long, vague letter to Sarah, emphasizing errors in judgment and her feelings of being undervalued as a wife and mother. She insisted again that she had never been unfaithful to Dave, but made no true apology, confident her strong position as a breadwinner shielded her. Meanwhile, Dave gathered the children to discuss their approach when Laura returned. Unless we hear otherwise, she'll be home Friday, he began. What do we do? Sarah spoke first, her tone sharp. Her latest letter proves she sees us as inconveniences. She chose a fling over her family. Unless she changes her attitude, I'm done with her. Dave nodded. Harsh but fair. Daniel? She just doesn't understand, Daniel said quietly. I hope she can learn, Dave replied. Larry? I don't care what happens to her, Larry said firmly. I just want to stay with you. Dave smiled at his youngest, then shared his plan. I think your mother lost her way after her promotion. If she admits her mistakes and shows remorse, we should give her a chance. If she doesn't, we'll reassess. What do you think? Sarah hesitated, but saw her siblings' need for stability. Fine, Dad, we'll try. But her letter shows no remorse. Oddly, I do believe she's never been unfaithful. Dave nodded. That's why I've planned a wake-up call for her. She needs to understand the emotional damage she's caused. If she breaks down and apologizes, we'll talk. If not, we'll decide what's next. Laura was caught off guard when she received a letter from Sarah, addressed to Dave and the children. It outlined her return timetable and sent a chill through her. According to the letter, Laura was expected home late Friday night. Upon arrival, she would take a polygraph test with questions submitted by all 4 family members. Afterward, she would stay in a motel for 2 nights to reflect, with the option to request a family meeting after noon on Saturday. Though irritated at being told what to do, Laura decided to play along, confident she could regain control after the polygraph. She believed the test would prove her fidelity and hoped it would convince Dave and smooth things over. She began speculating about the questions Dave might ask. If the test focused on whether she had sex with Peter or anyone else, she felt safe. However, questions about her intentions or behavior as a wife were more troubling, especially considering her history with Peter and Michael. Realizing overthinking could raise her stress levels, Laura resolved to stay calm. When she landed, Laura avoided telling anyone her arrival time, opting for a cab to the polygraph appointment. Instead of feeling triumphant, she arrived burdened, knowing the situation had spiraled far beyond her control. At the testing center, the technician explained the procedure and began calibration questions. Then came the first real question. 2 weeks ago, did you go to Bali with the intention of having extramarital sex with Peter Auer? Yes, Laura answered, her voice steady. The technician checked the readings, made a note, and closed the test. That's it? Laura asked, stunned. Just one question? The technician replied, yes, and I suspect it was written by your husband. It seems he doesn't care whether you had an affair in Bali. He wanted confirmation of your intent. To him, your intention was enough. He gestured toward divorce lawyer cards at reception. Good luck, Mrs. Brown. Reeling, Laura realized her strategy to prove physical fidelity had completely missed the mark. Enraged, she made an impulsive decision. She jumped into a cab and headed home, convinced she needed to confront Dave directly. As she approached the house, Dave, Daniel, and Larry watched from a parked car across the street. They silently exchanged glances, relieved they had prepared for this moment the night before. Unwilling to engage in a confrontation in front of the children, Dave drove them away to the motel where Laura's room was waiting, their phones turned off to avoid further contact. Laura didn't contact the family until late Monday, shattering any hope that she had used the weekend to reflect. That night, Dave received a letter from Sarah delivering Laura's message. The letter accused Dave of using low tactics by involving the children against her and informed him of an emergency family court hearing her lawyer was organizing to decide temporary custody of Danielle and Larry. Laura also announced she had scheduled a psychologist session for the family and a meeting on Wednesday night to discuss the future. Laura spent the weekend crafting a strategy to salvage her position. Her plan focused on 3 fronts: saving her marriage through counseling, choosing a female counselor to sway things in her favor, explaining her actions to the children during family sessions, and securing legal advantages if divorce became inevitable. On Tuesday, Laura was already seated in the counselor's office when Dave arrived. The counselor greeted him warmly and directed them to sit in chairs facing her, though spaced apart. After introductions, Laura insisting on her first name while Dave chose Mr. Brown, the counselor invited Laura to speak first. Laura recounted their marriage, claiming, "I was a faithful wife and mother until I made a terrible mistake, lied to my family, and went on a date with another man. There was no sex, as my behavior shows, but the intent was there. I regret my actions and wish to move forward with my marriage." The counselor then turned to Dave. Dave spoke plainly. "My children's main grievance is their mother's lies. She used her vacation to leave us and deliberately avoided contact by leaving her phone behind. And no, I did not hire anyone to surveil her in Bali." Laura looked stunned. She had assumed surveillance would be his first move. Dave continued, "I didn't want to believe she was seeing someone until our youngest daughter hacked her email and found the plans she made with her lover. I canceled the credit cards only after Sarah discovered Laura's attempts to block family finances, leaving me powerless." Laura was speechless, realizing her daughters had exposed her precautions and interpreted them as betrayal. Dave's tone hardened. "As for her intentions in these sessions, pardon me for not believing a word she says." The counselor asked Dave, "What do you hope to achieve here?" "I want to understand why my wife thought it was acceptable to lie and plan to sleep with another man," he replied. At this moment, their marriage might have had a chance, until the counselor muttered, "Oh, we have a dinosaur." Dave froze. He concluded that Laura had chosen a counselor biased against him and stormed out. Rather than running after him to apologize, Laura vented her frustration at the counselor. By the time she was done, Dave was gone. The counselor apologized to Laura and convinced her to schedule another session. She also contacted Dave to apologize and offered him a solo session. The family meeting on Wednesday fared no better. Laura invited them to dinner beforehand, but Sarah bluntly declined, reminding her mother she couldn't cook. They agreed to arrive at 7:30 p.m. When they walked in, Laura attempted hugs, but they all responded coldly. As they sat together on the couch, leaving Laura alone across from them, she tried to coax Sarah to her side. Sarah refused. Disheartened, Laura launched into her prepared speech. It was light on apologies and heavy on excuses. She claimed she felt unappreciated as a woman and breadwinner, lamented her husband's routine attention, and admitted she had missed the admiration single women enjoy. She justified her actions by saying she had succumbed to the flattery of a younger man. The cold, unyielding expressions of her family made it clear. Trust had been broken and there was no going back. During Laura's speech, she directed her attention at Daniel and Larry, avoiding Dave's gaze, while Sarah sat scribbling notes, her irritation evident. Finally, Sarah broke the silence. "Damn, Mom, you've let me down again." "What? Why?" Laura asked, startled. "I'd give you 85% on the cliché test. If you'd added that no one gets hurt if they don't find out, you'd score 100%, Sarah retorted. Laura flushed, unsure if it was from anger or embarrassment. She realized her children weren't going to sympathize with her while Dave held their trust. "David," she said sharply, "to the kitchen, now!" Behind the closed door, Laura hissed, "Does it really have to come to this, David? Me breaking you until you beg for forgiveness?" Dave sighed, saddened by her combative nature. "It doesn't have to. If you'd simply do what's right, none of this would be inevitable." "If you drop that counselor and I'll see you in court, Laura," Dave cut her off. On Thursday, Dave moved into a 3-bedroom rental house, aware the situation wouldn't resolve soon. He learned the custody hearing for Danielle and Larry was scheduled for Tuesday. After hearing which judge was assigned, Dave called John, who noted the judge had a history of siding against fathers. Despite this, Dave declined legal representation, opting to represent himself. John offered advice over the weekend about court procedures, and Dave prepared carefully. Dave focused on his children's well-being, spending the weekend setting up their new home. Around the table, he explained his plans honestly. The kids brightened as they joined in, helping to research and plan for their future. On Tuesday, Laura's attorney was surprised Dave planned to represent himself, recognizing the challenge Laura might face under his questioning. Due to delays, the court only addressed procedural matters, with the hearing continuing the next day. By Wednesday, local reporters had caught wind of the case. The courtroom was abuzz with anticipation as Laura's attorney began detailing property ownership and earning power before Dave had his turn to question Laura. Reporters in attendance noted her visible nervousness. Dave stood, his tone calm and deliberate. "Laura, I built our family home with my own hands, correct?" "Yes," she admitted quietly. "And I earned most of the money for our household while you returned to work 2 months after each child was born, is that correct?" "Yes," she replied, avoiding his gaze. He continued, "And who prepared our children's meals? Breakfasts, school lunches, and dinners?" Laura shifted uncomfortably. "I worked long hours," she responded defensively. "So would you say I was the primary caregiver for our children?" Dave asked pointedly. "Probably," she conceded. Dave's tone sharpened as he shifted topics. "You recently lied to me and to your children, then went to Bali for 2 weeks to have sex with another man, didn't you?" Laura's attorney immediately objected. "Objection, Your Honor? Infidelity is irrelevant in custody disputes." Dave maintained his composure as he responded. "Your Honor, I'm not focusing on infidelity. I'm questioning my wife's character as a fit mother." The judge considered briefly. "Objection overruled." Laura bristled and attempted to explain. "I went to Bali for a vacation and happened to go with a male friend," she said, her voice strained. Dave pressed on, holding up a sheet of paper. "And before you left, did you leave this letter for me?" Without waiting for a direct answer, he read the letter aloud, each word resonating in the silent courtroom. Reporters scribbled furiously, and Laura's furious silence spoke louder than any denial. Dave's voice cut through the tension. "Upon returning, did you apologize to your husband or your children for your lies and immoral intentions?" The courtroom fell silent again, the weight of the question hanging in the air. Again, Laura remained silent, her expression steely. Dave concluded, "Your Honor, the decision here is straightforward. I've always been the primary caregiver. The children should remain with me in the home I built, where they've grown up. Unlike my wife, I've not lied or betrayed my family. I request full custody, and for my wife to stop influencing our children negatively." Dave sat with his back to Laura, ignoring her seething glare. The judge wasted no time delivering her ruling. Temporary custody of the children and the family home would go to Laura, citing studies favoring mothers in divorce cases. Laura smiled triumphantly, but Dave remained composed. He had anticipated this outcome. Standing, he addressed the court. "Your Honor, I'd like to reference your rulings in similar cases where custody was awarded to the primary caregiver." He listed precedents and cited studies debunking the idea that children are always better off with their mother. "So, tell me, Your Honor, can a man with a his organ win in your court?" The judge, caught off guard, quickly closed the session. Dave handed copies of Laura's incriminating letter to reporters before walking out without looking back. Laura's lawyer congratulated her, but her victory felt hollow. Dave's remarks about her lack of remorse had struck a nerve. Instead of reflection, Laura's instinct to fight kicked in. Dave, guided by advice from Sarah, escalated his efforts. He filed a complaint with the federal court president alleging judicial bias. That weekend, he moved into a rental home with the children and spent time fixing it up, involving them in planning their future. On Tuesday, Laura's lawyer was surprised to learn Dave intended to represent himself in the custody hearing. In court, Dave's calm questioning highlighted his role as the primary caregiver and Laura's dishonesty. Reporters eagerly documented her visible discomfort. Dave read Laura's damning letter aloud, her silence speaking volumes. He concluded, "Your Honor, I've always been my children's primary caregiver. My wife's actions show she lacks the character to properly influence our children. Custody should remain with me." Newspaper articles the next day criticized both Laura and the judge. Meanwhile, Laura's strained relationship with the children worsened. They reluctantly spent time at her house but refused to engage. Laura struggled with basic tasks like making school lunches and relied on canteen money instead. At a solo counseling session, Laura laid out conditions for taking Dave back and confessed to 2 previous inappropriate relationships, emphasizing there was no sex, though she admitted that this wasn't by her choice. She couldn't understand why Dave was so offended, as she believed intent didn't matter if nothing physical had happened. The counselor warned reconciliation was unlikely due to Dave's focus on her dishonesty and intentions. The next day, Dave's session with the counselor was brief. He demanded either a referral to someone impartial or a declaration that the marriage was irretrievable. Fearful of damaging her career further, the counselor chose the latter and reported the dissolution of the marriage. At home, Dave found Danielle and Larry settled in. A police officer arrived citing a court order, but the children refused to leave. When Laura arrived, she demanded, "David, just tell the kids to come with me. Give me the house, and I'll be generous with visitation and property division." "Laura, leave," Dave replied. "I won't force them into something that violates their sense of right and wrong." "David, I'm not a bad person. You know me." "No, I don't," Dave said coldly. "The woman I married wouldn't have done this. She wouldn't have betrayed me, shown no remorse, and tried to force me into accepting her behavior. I found out yesterday about your 2 earlier affairs. What did I do to deserve this? And what's your plan now?" Realizing the counselor had revealed her secrets, Laura blushed with anger and guilt. Unable to lash out at Dave, she seethed internally. "She's not allowed to tell you that," Laura snapped, her frustration evident as her grasp on the situation continued to unravel. Dave remained silent as Laura stormed out in a rage. Later, he erased the recording Daniel had placed in Laura's purse before her counseling session. Confident justice would soon catch up with the counselor. He was right. 3 days later, the counselor was dismissed. On Saturday, Children's Services arrived to enforce the custody ruling, but Danielle and Larry refused to leave without being forcibly removed. When the officers explained the court's decision, Danielle shot back, "Then the courts were wrong. We won't live with someone who hurt our father." The officers left, unable to resolve the situation. Laura spent the next week trying to reconcile with her children, but they ignored her calls and deleted her messages. Attempts to speak with Dave ended abruptly when he realized she wasn't apologizing. Frustrated, Dave hired John as his divorce attorney. With Sarah's help, he discovered Laura was preparing for another business trip. Taking vacation time, Dave dedicated himself to helping the children adjust and prepare for their future. When Laura returned on Friday, she was stunned. The award-winning house she had cherished was gone, replaced by a damaged structure purchased at an insurance auction. Inside, she found her belongings neatly packed, new locks installed, and a copy of the title deed on the floor. The document confirmed that while she owned the land, the house was no longer hers. She called her lawyer, only to confirm that the arrangement was legal. Realizing Sarah had taken control of the family trusts, Laura cursed her arrogance in assuming her children would side with her. Consumed by anger and self-pity, she wrote a letter to her children asking, "Do you really hate me that much?" Dave replied simply, "We don't hate you. You knew I would always protect our family, even from you." On Monday, Laura received Dave's divorce filing at work. The agreement seemed generous at first, granting her full ownership of the jointly acquired property. However, deductions included Bali trip expenses, divorce costs, and penalties for her financial maneuvers. Custody would be determined by the children's preferences, with Larry's decision acting as the tiebreaker. When Laura tried to revoke the children's trusts, her financial advisor informed her it was impossible. He planned everything perfectly, the advisor admitted. Laura attempted to appoint a new counselor, but since the first had declared the marriage irretrievable, she needed Dave's consent, which he refused. He reminded her that he had suggested a neutral counselor weeks earlier, but she had rejected the idea. Now it was too late. Realizing she had no better option, Laura signed the divorce agreement. Though she retained custody and access to the trusts as the children's guardian, she lost the second parcel of land and other assets. The divorce proceeded quickly once finalized, leaving Laura to face the consequences of her actions alone. Laura's lawyer assured her the case would remain under the same family court judge, who was known for bias. He admitted he usually advised male clients to concede under this judge. Confident in her victory and planned to leave Dave destitute, Laura relaxed. She even toyed with the idea of magnanimously returning to his life on her terms, or leaving him to his supposed poverty. A month later, Laura entered the courtroom feeling confident, but was greeted by her nervous lawyer. He pointed out a woman in a suit seated in the gallery. "She works for the chief federal judge. Something's going on and I don't like it," he muttered, unsettling Laura. The judge opened the session by announcing her early retirement, her tone bitter. As the hearing began, Laura's lawyer objected to Dave's request for her to cover legal fees, suggesting they each pay their own. John, Dave's attorney, countered that he was working pro bono. The case quickly turned against Laura. John presented compelling evidence of Dave's role as the primary caregiver, while Laura's lawyer, relying on the judge's usual leniency, was unprepared. The judge, glancing frequently at the woman in the gallery, appeared constrained and insincere. Her ruling awarded Dave custody and praised his generous property division offer. Laura was left stunned, barely registering the final gavel. Back at her one-bedroom apartment, Laura felt defeated, but had no time for self-pity. She still had to finalize the sale of her old property, which she had listed in anticipation of a favorable financial outcome. The unique lot, once beautifully landscaped, required a specific type of house, making the sale price low. At the settlement meeting, she prepared to hand over the title deeds, but was told the buyers would arrive shortly. When Dave's car arrived, followed by trucks carrying her old house in a crane, Laura realized he was the buyer. Stunned, she left without a word. Back at her apartment, Laura stared at the meager check representing the wreckage of her once prosperous life. She picked up her thought journal and, in bold red letters, wrote, "Next time you get an itch, go to a pharmacy. Next time you mess up, apologize. You're twice as smart as you think you are." 8 weeks later, Laura decided to extend an olive branch. She purchased champagne and went to her former property to congratulate its new owners and share her humility. Laura drove to the property with the bottle of champagne nestled beside her, the golden label glinting in the sunlight. She had rehearsed this moment a dozen times, imagining a warm reception and perhaps even the beginning of a new chapter, one rooted in humility and reconciliation. As she approached the driveway, she was struck by the transformation. The house Dave had built with such care had been restored to its former glory, standing as a testament to the resilience she had underestimated in her husband. When she knocked on the door, Sarah answered. The expression on her daughter's face was guarded but not hostile, giving Laura a flicker of hope. "Hi, Mom," Sarah said flatly, stepping aside to let her in. Inside, Laura saw the dining table set for a family dinner. Dave and the boys were arranging dishes, their laughter filling the room. The warmth of the scene made Laura feel like an intruder. She handed the champagne to Sarah, who raised an eyebrow but took it without comment. Dave looked up and met Laura's gaze. His face was calm, devoid of malice, but also lacking the affection she had once taken for granted. "Laura," he said simply, nodding in acknowledgement. "I wanted to say congratulations on the house," Laura began, her voice faltering slightly. "It looks wonderful. You've done an amazing job." "Thanks," Dave replied, returning to the table. His focus on the meal rather than her words stung, but she pressed on. "I also wanted to apologize," Laura said, louder this time. The room grew quiet as everyone's attention shifted to her. "I made so many mistakes. I hurt all of you, and I'm truly sorry. I hope you can forgive me someday." Larry's voice broke the silence. "Why did you do it, Mom?" he asked, his tone a mix of curiosity and hurt. "Didn't we matter to you?" Tears welled up in Laura's eyes. "You mattered more than anything," she said, her voice trembling. I just lost sight of that. I thought I needed something more, something different, and I was wrong. You all deserved better from me." Sarah crossed her arms. "So, what now?" she asked, her skepticism evident. "You've said sorry, but sorry doesn't fix everything." Laura nodded, acknowledging the truth in her daughter's words. "You're right," she admitted. "I don't expect everything to go back to how it was. I just want the chance to show you that I'm trying to be better." Dave finally spoke, his tone measured. "Laura, I'm glad you're reflecting, but the trust we had is gone, and trust is the foundation of any relationship. It'll take time and consistent effort to rebuild, if that's even possible." "I understand," Laura said softly. "I'm not here to ask for anything today. I just wanted to apologize and let you know I'm taking steps to change. I've started seeing a therapist and joined a support group for people who've made similar mistakes. It's helping me understand what led me here." The sincerity in her voice seemed to reach them, though no one responded immediately. After a moment, Daniel spoke up. "It's good you're doing that," he said cautiously. "But actions speak louder than words, Mom." "I know," Laura replied. "And I'm prepared to show you through my actions that I'm committed to making amends." Dave stood and walked to the door, opening it as a silent cue that the conversation was over. "Thank you for coming by, Laura," he said. "Take care of yourself." Laura nodded, understanding that she had to leave. As she walked back to her car, she glanced back at the house. It was filled with the love and unity she had jeopardized but now longed to protect, even from afar. Over the next year, Laura dedicated herself to rebuilding her life. She focused on her career, volunteering, and maintaining the personal growth she had promised her family. Though her interactions with Dave and the children remained infrequent, they were civil, and slowly, glimmers of warmth began to reappear. At Sarah's suggestion, Laura began writing letters to her children, sharing memories and reflections without expecting replies. One day, she received a response from Larry. It was short, but hopeful. "Thanks for your letter, Mom. I'm not ready to talk yet, but I'm glad you're trying." That single sentence was enough to renew Laura's resolve. She knew the road to redemption was long, but she was willing to walk it, one small step at a time. Long before the current tumult unfolded, Jake Van Dam was a rising star in his family's aeronautical business, admired for his innovative approach and dedication. His family's vast estate, dotted with ancient trees and sprawling gardens, was a place where tradition often overshadowed individuality. Despite these constraints, Jake harbored dreams of carving out his own legacy beyond the shadow of his controlling father and domineering elder brother, Rufus Jr. Jake's professional success was mirrored in his personal life, or so it seemed. He met Brooke at a charity swim event when she cleverly inserted herself into his circle of friends. Jake was drawn to her vivaciousness, mistaking her relentless ambition for charm. Their relationship developed swiftly, culminating in marriage after Brooke revealed her pregnancy. What Jake didn't know was the tangled web of manipulations and secrets that Brooke had already woven. Rufus Jr., Jake's brother, was a polarizing figure. His aggressive personality and unchecked steroid use made him both a formidable rival and a source of scandal. Despite this, Rufus enjoyed the family's favor, often leaving Jake to fend for himself in familial disputes. It wasn't long before Rufus and Brooke's paths crossed more intimately, creating a storm that would upend Jake's life. Jake's marriage, though stable on the surface, was marred by unspoken tensions. Brooke's extravagant lifestyle and manipulative tendencies gradually revealed themselves, especially as her relationship with Rufus deepened. While Jake remained oblivious, focused on his career and his children, Brooke and Rufus schemed behind closed doors. As they gathered on the terrace at the Travelers' Inn, one of the women, wineglass in hand, leaned forward and asked Brooke, "Have you spoken to your ex-husband since the split?" Brooke paused, the question seemingly stirring memories she'd rather leave untouched. "No," Brooke replied, her voice steady but edged with finality. "Since the day I forced him out and handed over the divorce papers alongside a restraining order, there's been no communication. He tried reaching out to the kids, but after I told them the truth about what he did to us, they've kept their distance." Ellie, the newcomer, hesitated. "Was it a messy breakup?" "There's still a lot of hurt," Brooke replied. "When did it happen?" Ellie asked. "A year ago," Brooke answered. He fought it for a year trying to convince the kids to see him, but they wanted nothing to do with him, Brooke continued. Eventually, he signed the papers and left. Honestly, he's been gone for 2 years. Good riddance. Brooke's tone was sharp. Ellie then asked, "Why did you end it?" "Because he cheated on me with his first love, Gemma Evans," Brooke said coldly. Suddenly, a voice interrupted from behind. "Jake Van Dam cheated? No way, he's not that complicated. And if I had, I'd remember." Brooke turned, glaring. Well, look who decided to show up. You've got some nerve." Gemma smirked. "Look who's talking. You were already working on Jake while we were still together. Your lies tore us apart and now you're blaming me?" Brooke narrowed her eyes. "When was this?" 2 years ago, as you well know," Gemma replied coolly. "If I had slept with Jake, I'd remember," Brooke snapped. 2 years ago, I was in Edinburgh, 5,000 miles away, studying linguistics. I can prove that. Unlike you. I've been overseas for 3 years, and before that, I taught high school across the country." Brooke's face paled. This wasn't what she expected. "If it wasn't Gemma, then who was he cheating with?" she demanded. "He cheated, and I kicked him out," Gemma said flatly. "And I think your games made sure he couldn't stay here anymore. Even his parents were probably fooled." Brooke's face flushed. "I don't believe for a second he was fooled. He was just following you." Gemma leaned in. "Are those kids even his? I could ask, but I've got other things to do, like talking to Jake's parents." Brooke went pale. "Don't you dare. I'll make you regret it." Gemma smirked. "Life hasn't been kind to you, huh? You use a lot of makeup to cover it up. But I'm off to see your former in-laws and clear up this cheating mess. They'll appreciate the truth. Goodbye." Gemma turned and headed to her car, making her way to the Van Damme house. It looked just as she remembered. 3 parking spots by the gate, 2 giant ginkgo trees, a long shaded driveway, and 3 granite steps leading to the door. She parked, grabbed her laptop, and walked up to the door. Jake's grandfather answered. "Yes, young lady?" he asked. "Good afternoon, Mr. Van Dam. I'm Gemma Evans. Do you remember me?" she asked. "Ah, yes, I remember," he replied. "Your name came up in the mess with Jake's marriage." "Yes, sir," Gemma said. "I'm here to clear something up. Jake couldn't have been involved with me. I was in Edinburgh at the time, and I can prove it." The older man studied her. After a pause, he spoke. "Call me Rufus Sr., he said with a smile. "It's brave of you to come forward. My son and daughter-in-law have their doubts about Jake, but I'm not convinced. He's not the type to cheat." Gemma nodded. "Why are you so sure?" "Because you seem honest," Rufus said. "And Jake is my grandson. I know him better than anyone." Gemma hesitated, then said, "Jake doesn't know it yet, but I'm going to be the next Mrs. Van Dam. But first I need to find him." Rufus's eyes twinkled. "Jake's been keeping his distance. He's not in touch with anyone, but I promise not to reveal where he is. He's at St. Christopher's Crossing, doing well at university. That's our secret, though." Gemma smiled. "I've been offered a job at that university, and I've accepted. I'll be seeing him soon." Just then, a voice called from inside. "Dad, who's there?" Rufus grinned at Gemma. "Do you know where the kitchen is?" She nodded, but as she turned, she nearly bumped into Jake's mother, Anna, who was furious. "You've got some nerve," Anna shouted. "You ruined my son's marriage, and now you show up here? Get out!" Rufus stepped in. "Anna, she's my guest. Let me hear her out. She says she was abroad during the affair." Anna glared at Gemma. "I don't believe you." Gemma picked up her laptop and smiled at Rufus. "I'll show you the proof." An hour later, Gemma stood before Anna, still upset, and a furious Rufus. "So, what now?" Anna asked, her voice tight. Gemma decided to be upfront. "I'm leaving tomorrow. Jake and I got close fast, but things changed when Brooke came into the picture." She shared how she lost both her friend and potential soulmate to Brooke, but didn't mention her suspicions about the pregnancy. It was Jake's story to tell, if she ever found him. Anna, shocked by the revelation about the woman who was once the mother of her grandchildren, suggested her husband, Jake Jr., meet Gemma, too. "Would you like to stay for dinner? I'd also like you to talk to Randall, my husband, about your side." Gemma politely declined. "I'm preparing for my new job." She didn't specify where. As she said her goodbyes, Anna turned away for a moment. "Gemma," Anna said quietly, "if you find Jake, please let us know. We've made some bad choices, and I just want my son back." Gemma nodded softly. "If or when I find him, I'll pass on the message. But I can't reveal where he is. Jake disappeared for a reason. He doesn't want to be found." Gemma made her way to her car. Halfway there, she spotted a man approaching. Jake's brother, she thought, eyeing the heavy-set man lumbering toward her. He was broad-shouldered, with a thick neck and a slow, awkward walk. His appearance made it clear he could barely move his arms. Rufus Van Dam, Jake's brother, eyed the slender woman with dark hair, feeling vaguely familiar but unsure where he'd seen her. She could use a bigger chest, he thought, before adding, but those legs, I'd love to feel them wrapped around me. He entered the house and greeted his grandfather. "Got a guest?" he asked, glancing at Gemma as she headed toward the gate. Rufus answered flatly, "Yes, an old friend of Jake's. She's trying to reconnect, but we don't know where he is, do we?" "That worthless, cheating fool," Rufus Jr. muttered. "I want him as far away as possible." He then went upstairs to his apartment built for him after an accident. Meanwhile, Brooke reflected on her life. Jake, 2 years younger than her, had been a part of her life for a while now. Their kids, 16 and 15, were born close together. She first noticed Jake while finishing a 10K swim. Initially, she didn't think much of him, but when a dark-haired girl helped him out of his wetsuit, Brooke's interest grew. Jake's athletic build and striking features caught her eye. She began plotting how to win him over, undeterred by the fact that the girl was probably his girlfriend. It took 6 months for Brooke to break through Jake's shy barriers. Conveniently, his girlfriend moved away, making it easier for Brooke to get close. Soon after, Jake invited her to meet his family at their monthly barbecue. She learned Jake was the youngest of 3, with an older brother and sister. At the barbecue, Brooke noticed the stark differences between Jake and his brother Rufus. Both were about the same height, but Rufus was much heavier and more brash. Rufus took an immediate interest in Brooke, showering her with attention. After 2 weeks, he managed to get her settled into a hotel. A month later, Brooke realized she'd missed her period. Rufus laughed when she asked for advice, telling her, "You should have been on the pill." In time, Brooke's relationships with Rufus and Jake intertwined. After a few months, she married Jake in a small ceremony. Brooke was content. Jake was a reliable provider, and Rufus was her bad boy lover on the side. Jake was good in bed, but Rufus was just for quick, casual sex. Brooke didn't mind that she didn't always peak. The secrecy made it exciting. 13 years later, Rufus's steroid use finally caught up with him. While working out, he collapsed from a heart attack, but was revived by a nearby nurse. Doctors confirmed the cause, a ruptured myocardium from excessive steroid use. After surgery, he was discharged in poor condition, his once prominent muscles replaced by flab. Rufus knew he would need long-term care from then on. Over the next few months, Rufus began manipulating Brooke. He criticized Jake, telling her she deserved better and didn't have to endure financial struggles. Slowly, Brooke became more demanding, asking for a new car and pushing Jake in ways she never had before. One day, during one of her rants, Jake walked away mid-conversation. Brooke shouted after him, but he simply went to his office and started working. A few minutes later, when she entered, Jake told her coldly to leave. It was then that Brooke realized she'd pushed him too far. Jake, usually patient, had finally reached his breaking point. Jake realized he could no longer ignore the damage done. After years of working toward taking over his family's business, his father had pushed him aside to make room for Rufus. Jake suspected his brother was involved, but he didn't care. When his father fired him and tried to force him into a non-compete agreement, Jake laughed and walked out, singing Tommy by The Who. Shortly after, a competitor offered Jake a better job with fewer hours and better benefits. He had already started his own company years earlier, funneling freelance work through an offshore account in Luxembourg, something Brooke had never questioned. Now, Jake made sure all his freelance income went into those accounts. Jake decided it was time to focus on his kids and cut back on work. One morning, as he read the newspaper at the kitchen table, Brooke walked in, demanding to know where he'd been the night before. He calmly responded, "I've been working 15-hour days for a month. I'm done with it. I've reduced my hours to 30 a week. If you want more, get a job." He paused, then added, "The way you've been treating me is unacceptable. If it continues, we'll be getting a divorce." With that, Jake left for breakfast, leaving Brooke stunned. Confused, Brooke called Rufus for help. "Jake's being stubborn. I don't know what to do," she said. Rufus smirked. "I've got a plan B." Later, Jake's secretary informed him that a visitor had arrived. An older woman handed him 2 sealed envelopes saying, "You've been served." As she left, she muttered to the clerk, "Please take care of him." Jake opened the envelopes to find a restraining order preventing him from contacting his wife, children, or parents, as well as an affidavit accusing him of being involved with Gemma Evans. Heartbroken, Jake began dealing with the legal mess. His bank accounts were frozen, and he was forced to rent a small apartment. Back at the house, Brooke overheard Olivia and Brian whispering about a problem. Intervening, Brooke suggested, "Why don't you talk to Uncle Rufus about it?" Olivia responded mockingly, "What advice could that sweaty pervert give?" Brooke was offended on Rufus's behalf, but kept quiet. "What? He's your uncle," she said, trying to stay calm. "Yeah, a great uncle," Olivia shot back. "He offered me money for showing my chest and said he'd reward me for helping with his urges." "That's not what he asked for," her daughter replied, disgusted. Brooke's heart sank. "If that's true, Rufus is a dangerous pervert," she thought. That night, uncomfortable truths surfaced, revealing Rufus's twisted nature. Jake had taught the kids to value themselves, keeping them safe. Now, Brooke had a new problem. She'd relied on Jake's child support, but that was ending, and she was about to depend on Rufus for financial support. She began regretting some of her choices. When Gemma met Professor Leonard Daltrey, they exchanged pleasantries, and he shared his role at the university, mentioning he was a widower living with his girlfriend. He recommended St. Christopher's Woods for housing, pointing out a great lot, though it was already taken by a part-time assistant. He also mentioned the assistant was great with children and designing a learning center at the university, but the assistant was very private and hard to reach. Gemma, looking for a place to settle, was joined by Nadia Thompson on a land search. They found a plot for sale in St. Christopher's Woods with a building permit. Nadia suggested a designer for the project, an aeronautical engineer and loner who was designing his own house. Gemma was eager to meet him. Meanwhile, Grandpa Brooke, in a soft voice, asked Brooke, "Do you know where Jake is?" Brooke hesitated. "Why do you ask? Trouble in paradise?" The question hit Brooke hard. Grandpa continued, "Rufus has some unsavory traits. His steroid dependence only makes it worse." Brooke denied knowing what he meant, but Grandpa pressed on. "Those kids of yours don't have Jake's genes." Shocked, Brooke responded, "How dare you?" Grandpa calmly pointed out, "What color are your eyes? Jake's? Your kids?" He noted the kids had brown eyes, unlike Jake's green ones, and that Rufus had brown eyes. "You spent a lot of time in his bed, didn't you?" Brooke was stunned into silence as Grandpa pressed further. "You've let Rufus manipulate you. Now you want Jake back. But I'm not helping you." Devastated, Brooke left, and Grandpa, lost in thought, considered writing a letter. Gemma had grown close to Nadia, but had never visited their home until now. When Nathaniel answered the door, he greeted her with a warm smile, introducing himself as Nathan. Inside, Gemma noticed the scar on his face and wondered about his past. In the kitchen, she complimented their home, asking Nadia how she'd found such a gem. Nadia's expression softened as she paused, lost in thought. "It's a long story, but it ends well. I'll share it someday, but I need Nathan's permission first. Not many know the details. Let's just say Nathan took this place from the local bullies and tore them down in the process." She added, "Jacob isn't my biological son. He's Nathan's from his first marriage." "Was Nathan married before?" Gemma asked. "No," Nadia replied. "He was widowed." "But in 6 months, Jacob won't be the only child here," Nadia said with a smile. Gemma hugged her. "That's great news," she said, her heart lifting. She almost asked when the baby would arrive, but Nathan interrupted. "Gemma, let me introduce you to Jake," Nathan said. Gemma beamed, rushing to hug him. "Jake!" she exclaimed, but he didn't respond. Jake looked at her flatly. "Gemma, it's been a long time," he said, his tone distant. Gemma's excitement drained, and she stepped back, confused. Nadia and Nathan exchanged a glance, and Nathan asked, "Do you two know each other?" Jake answered, "We used to be friends." Gemma's heart sank, and tears welled up in her eyes. This wasn't the reunion she'd hoped for. "Jake, why are you acting this way?" she asked, trembling. "Aren't you happy to see me? I missed you." Jake glanced at Nathan and Nadia, who nodded for him to speak. "We'll give you some space," Nathan said, leading Nadia away. In the study, Jake looked at Gemma, clearly upset. "You told Brooke we were involved while I was still married to her," he said quietly. "You signed an affidavit that ruined my marriage. Why would I be happy to see you? Those lies hurt me more than you know." Gemma felt a wave of anger toward Brooke for using her to destroy Jake's reputation. She straightened up, her voice steady. "Listen closely. Before coming here, I spent 3 years in Europe. I never told her anything. I confronted her when I overheard her bragging about it, and I made it clear I wasn't part of her lies. I even went to your parents and talked to your grandfather. He told me you were doing well and I might run into you here. I didn't expect it to be so soon, but I'd already planned to find you. I've missed you." Jake's face flushed with emotion. "But what about the affidavit?" he asked, still confused. It's fake, Gemma replied firmly. If you still have the original, someone's going to pay for it. Jake stared at her, astonished. Gemma, I loved you, I still do, but I thought you betrayed me, and I spent so much time wondering what I'd done wrong. So, you believe me now? Gemma asked, hope in her voice. Of course, Jake said without hesitation. You've already proven it with a call to my grandfather. You've never lied to me. I believe you. Relief washed over Gemma. One hurdle cleared. Now how would she tell him how she truly felt? Gathering her courage, she asked, So, can we kiss and make up? She slowly pushed her chair back. Jake stood and walked over, pulling her into a hug. Can you forgive me? He asked softly. For what? Gemma replied, offended. You've been manipulated. There's nothing to forgive. Jake leaned in, but Gemma quickly turned, kissing him on the lips instead of the cheek. She pulled him closer, running her tongue over his lips. After the kiss, she smiled brightly. Jake stood frozen, stunned. Did you just kiss me? He asked, almost disbelieving. Yep, Gemma said confidently. I've wanted to do that ever since I found out you weren't married to her. And I've already told Brooke I have a claim on you. Just let me know if I'm moving too fast, but whether slow or fast, I'm coming for you. Jake paused, enjoying the closeness. You know I'm a bit of a wreck, right? That's why I'm building my house so far away. I need time to heal. It's been painful. Gemma gazed up at him. Let me in, she said softly. I'll be here for you. I know you married her because she was pregnant, but honestly, I'm starting to wonder if the baby's really yours. Something's off. Jake shifted uncomfortably. Let's leave that for later, he said, trying to shift the focus. One last thing. Take the job offer from Professor Daltrey. It'll be good for you. As they walked back, Gemma smiled at her friends. Problem solved. He's mine now. Though he's not entirely sure of that yet, she added with a wink. Nadia clapped in approval. That was quick, Nadia grinned. What's next? Gemma wrapped herself around Jake, smiling. I have plans. One involves retribution, another involves never letting that man out of my sight, and I also want to know who to contact about the land we saw today. Dinner was a success, filled with laughter and stories. But as the evening went on, Gemma asked a serious question. Jake, did that woman ever explain how she had a fully developed baby after just 6.5 months of pregnancy? No, Jake said, shaking his head. I was too caught up to question it. Looking back, I realize how foolish that was. What are you suggesting? Nathan, who had been quietly observing, spoke up. She's suggesting the baby may not be yours, and that you've been set up. Jake quickly cut him off. But they look like me, both of them. He paused, struggling to express his thoughts, when 2 women rushed over to him. They embraced him, whispering in his ear. Jake regained his composure, his face hardening. What now? I need to know for sure. Nadia took his hand gently. Can you think of anyone who looks like you? A cousin? Gemma's eyes lit up. It has to be Rufus. Jake shook his head. No, they don't even like each other. Nadia raised an eyebrow. Or maybe that's what they want you to think. Either way, there's only one way to find out, she said firmly. A paternity test. You'll need a top lawyer. I know just the person, Donna Marshall. She's the best. Can you call her for me, Nathan? Jake asked. Meanwhile, Brooke's situation was getting worse. 2 weeks after Jake's grandfather refused to help her, she was still trapped. She needed Rufus for the financial support, but didn't want her children to never see him again. While preparing dinner, a knock came at the door. She opened it to find a man and a woman standing there. Can I help you? She asked. The woman asked, Are you Mrs. Brooke Puckett, ex-wife of Mr. Jacob Randall Van Dam? Yes, Brooke replied, wary. What's going on? The man showed a warrant. We need DNA samples from your children. Failure to comply will result in arrest. Why? What for? Brooke asked, her heart sinking. For a paternity test, the woman replied, leaving Brooke in shock. Brooke had always hoped her children were the key to Jake returning to her. If Jake learned they weren't his, he'd stop paying child support, and her comfortable life would end. At the same time, paramedics and a police officer arrived at the Van Dam house. Rufus Sr. watched from a distance, thinking Gemma had finally found Jake and that Jake was now putting everything together. Rufus Jr. had refused to cooperate with the authorities, even attacking an officer. Soon, Rufus Jr. was led away in a police car, humiliated. 2 weeks later, Gemma burst into Jake's apartment. Jake, the results are in! She dreaded the outcome, knowing it would be difficult for Jake either way. They sat together on the couch while Jake read the test results. When he finished, Gemma noticed he was pale, deeply troubled. "Jake?" she asked, concerned. "Are you okay? You look like you're having a heart attack." "I'm not having a heart attack," Jake said, "but I might soon if this keeps up. The kids are Rufus's, not mine, both of them. And now he and that cheating ex-wife are going to regret everything they've done to me." Gemma moved closer, wanting to comfort him, but Jake seemed distant. They hugged briefly and exchanged soft kisses on the cheek, but nothing more. Gemma hoped he'd feel the same way. Finally, Jake looked at her, vulnerable. "Gemma, don't take this the wrong way. I love you completely, and I've been blaming myself for letting Brooke pull me away when you weren't around. I know you deserve more than I can give right now, but before I can give myself fully to you, I need to fix this situation. I promise I'll take care of it, even if it's the hard way. I don't want you involved in this mess. If you want to walk away, I'll understand. We can part ways without hard feelings. On my side, at least." Gemma felt a wave of relief, like a cool shower after a long day in the sun. She could sense how hard it was for Jake to open up, and she felt the depth of his love in every word. After a moment, she pulled him closer and kissed him gently. The kiss was soft, yet full of passion, and Jake felt an electric shock. He was surprised, not only by the intensity, but also by the fact that Gemma wasn't pulling away, as he had feared. Pulling back just enough for their lips to almost touch, she whispered, "Don't be silly, Jake. You're stuck with me now. I'll be here for you through all of this." Jake wrapped his arms around her, kissing the top of her head, thinking, "She smells amazing." He then asked, quietly, almost shyly, "What if we delay building the house? By the time all this is sorted, I could expand mine and make it work for both of us." Gemma froze. Did he just ask me to move in with him? She couldn't resist asking, "Is that an invitation to move in?" "It is," Jake replied, his voice firm yet tender. "I'm committed to you, Gemma. If you want a ring and a ceremony, I'll give it to you. To me, marriage is just a formality, but if that's what you want, I'll do it." "I want the ring," she said firmly. "A simple, plain gold band. Nothing fancy, just something to show what we have." Jake chuckled. "I'll bring the broom once you pay for it." That week, Jake and Gemma visited Donna Marshall. After hearing Jake's desire for revenge, Donna listened patiently before replying, "You don't need me for this. You need someone tougher, someone who knows how to move fast. I know someone who can help. I can introduce you." Meanwhile, Brooke was doing chores when she realized she hadn't heard back about the DNA tests. She briefly hoped it might blow over. She had kept her children away from Rufus's influence, and their grandfather had been supportive. But then a loud knock at the door startled her. Hesitantly, she opened it to find Rufus furious and holding a bundle of papers. "What's going on?" he shouted, waving the papers at her. Brooke stepped back, startled. "I don't know, you tell me." Rufus yelled, "That idiot brother of mine wants a fortune for raising my kids, and now he's seized all my property to get it." Brooke sank into a chair, fear creeping in. "Jake's awake, and he's coming for me. Now that he knows the kids aren't his, he'll make me pay. If he goes after me, I'm finished. Edmund Dante would be a kitten compared to him." She felt her luxurious life slipping away. As Rufus Jr. ranted, a second knock came at the door. Brooke tried to ignore it, but the knocking grew louder. Reluctantly, she opened it to find a small man with round glasses and a mustache, accompanied by a woman with a video camera. "Are you Mrs. Brooke Puckett?" he asked. When she confirmed, he handed her an envelope. "You've been served. Have a good day," he said, walking off. Brooke stood frozen, watching the car drive away, her dread building. She opened the envelope slowly, her heart sinking. The DNA tests showed that Jake wasn't the father of either child. Rufus was. The papers also included a demand for reimbursement of all child support payments, with interest, due to the false claims she had made. The amount was staggering. There were also documents accusing Gemma Evans of falsifying an affidavit and defamation. Brooke panicked, but Rufus reassured her that the company would cover the costs now that everything had come to light. After all, she was the mother of his children, wasn't she? That evening, during a family dinner, Rufus Jr. began to explain how he and Brooke had developed feelings for each other and that she was now his girlfriend. "I'll take care of the kids after our lawyers fight off my brother's ridiculous demands." Rufus Sr. intervened calmly. "You need to get yourself a lawyer. The company isn't going to cover the costs of your deception or hers. Jake has already suffered enough because of you." A silence fell over the table. Jake's father spoke up. "Why not? Jake has every right to defend himself against these baseless accusations. The company has top-tier lawyers to handle this slander." Rufus Sr. responded firmly. The accusations aren't baseless. They're completely true. The children are Rufus's, not Jake's. You and Brooke have been deceiving him from the start. It seems Jake now has DNA proof, and if that's the case, he's right. Moreover, the company has strict rules about fraternization, and you've broken every one of them. If the lawyers take on this case, it won't be to fight Jake, but to enforce company policies that you've been disregarding for as long as Jake's been married to Brooke. Rufus Jr. exploded in anger. You can't do that. I'm the CEO, not you. Rufus Sr. chuckled softly. I own 70% of this company. I'm the chairman of the board. The board can override any decision made by the CEO. So if our legal team is involved, it won't be to fight Jake. It'll be to address the violations you've been making. Rufus Jr. stormed out of the room, kicking his chair aside. Once in the hallway, he froze, trying to catch his breath. Rufus Sr. followed, apologizing for the outburst. As he passed his son, his voice dropped into a deadly whisper. If I find out anything, I'll bury you so deep even the devil won't be able to find you. Got it? Stunned by the threat, Rufus Jr. quickly regained his arrogance. And how do you think you'll pull that off, old man? I have powerful connections too. Try me, and you'll see that I can still fight back. Rufus Sr. gave him a quick, dismissive pat on the back as he walked away. You better take care of yourself, or you won't be around long enough to see your plans come to fruition. Later, at his apartment, Rufus Sr. sat at his desk, flipping through his Rolodex. He found the number for the University of St. Christopher's Crossing and made the call. The next morning at breakfast, Rufus Sr. was pestered by both his son Randall and Rufus Jr. to let them use the company's legal team. After studying the documents, they realized the lawsuit would be costly, and their best hope was to drag it out until Jake ran out of money. But Rufus Sr. held firm in his decision. If I find out that you've consulted with any company lawyers, you'll both be out on the street faster than you can blink. This is a misuse of company resources. Got it? He left the room, making sure to emphasize his point. At his desk, Rufus Sr. called the university again. Good morning, this is Professor Van Dam. I'd like to speak with Professor Daltrey if he's available. I'd be very grateful. Moments later, a familiar voice answered. Rufus, old friend, it's been a while. How are you? Rufus Sr. smiled, though his tone was serious. Mentally, I'm fine. Physically, not so much, but that's a story for later. I need a favor that involves two people. Anything for you, my friend, Daltrey replied. You've always had my back, especially during that scandal with the short guy blackmailing students. What do you need? Rufus Sr. hesitated. I need to borrow 2 of your employees for my company. I have no other option. Which 2? Daltrey asked. Jake Van Dam and Gemma Evans. Daltrey paused. I understand about Jake, but Gemma... She came to see me recently, telling me she'd heard rumors about Jake's marriage and some foul play. She wanted to get in touch with him, especially now that he's divorced. I believe they've already connected. You wouldn't be wrong, Rufus Sr. replied. When can we meet? Let me know when you want me to bring them in, Daltrey said. Can you make it in 2 hours? Rufus Sr. asked. I can be there in half an hour, Daltrey answered. I'll make it happen, Rufus Sr. said. I know you're in a hurry. I am, Daltrey replied simply. See you soon. Later that day, Leon was surprised to see his old friend, who appeared frail and worn, though his voice remained strong and his eyes still held their spark. Before Jake and Gemma could enter his office, the 2 older men shared a tense conversation. In Leon's office, Jake, Gemma, Leon, and Rufus Sr. sat together. The reunion between Jake and his grandfather was bittersweet. There was regret over the lost time, but also happiness in finally being able to embrace each other. No introductions were needed as Rufus Sr. spoke directly. Jake, how would you feel about taking over the company and coming to live with me? He asked. Jake, stunned, replied, But Grandpa, why? What about Dad and Rufus? Rufus Sr. gave a sad smile. I'm ill, Jake, and it's getting worse. I'm at a point where I can't face the pair who are now running the company into the ground. I know you're capable of leading. I've seen you do it before. Jake, shocked, squeezed Gemma's hand. I don't know what to say. Why didn't you tell me? Jake asked, confused. I had my reasons, Rufus Sr. answered. But what about you? Surely Gemma is on board too. I'm building a home here, a family home. For us both, Gemma interrupted, laughing. A family home? Who's talking about taking things slow now? Jake looked at her, confused, before asking, Do you want me to stop the medication? As soon as you can, Gemma replied, then added, I want to have kids with you if you're ready for that. In a burst of passion, Gemma stood and kissed Jake fiercely in front of the two older men. "I took my last pill last night. Does that answer your question?" she said, her voice full of determination. Rufus Sr. cleared his throat, pulling them back to reality. "Jake, Gemma, I need to remind you that you're still part of the company. The office is less than an hour away." Jake looked into Gemma's eyes and she gave a subtle nod, signaling her support for his decision to accept his grandfather's offer. Jake turned to his grandfather. "What about my father and brother?" "Leave that to me," Rufus Sr. replied. "Once you're in charge, they won't be able to interfere. I've got my own issues with them." "When do you want me to take over?" Jake asked. "Are you really going to do it?" Rufus Sr. asked, a note of relief in his voice. "That makes me so happy." "Yes, Grandpa, we'll do it," Jake confirmed with resolve. "But as I near the end, the pain will only worsen." Leon, who had witnessed his wife's painful end of life, had set up a private clinic for end-of-life care. Rufus Sr. continued, "I plan to go there in about 10 days. Jake sat in silence, lost in thought, until Gemma asked, "Why all the secrecy?" "I suspect Randall and Rufus will stop at nothing to maintain their hold on the company," Rufus Sr. said. "Jake has already become a thorn in Rufus's side, and I've had to threaten him just to keep him from using company lawyers to fight Jake's lawsuits." Leon added, "We've got a plan to protect you both from Randall and Rufus." He turned to his old friend. "Should I explain it or do you want to?" Rufus Sr. nodded tiredly. "You do it. I'm worn out." Leon went on. "Once Rufus passes, we'll send a message to trusted managers within the company's offices and factories. They'll lock everything down. I'll create software similar to ransomware to do it. The employees will go home, with full pay, of course. We've made the necessary arrangements." Jake and Gemma were stunned by the scale of the plan. Jake asked, "What about us? What's our role in all of this?" "You'll be informed when the time comes," Leon replied, "but you must do nothing until the will is read. That's when everything will be clear. By then, Randall and Rufus won't be a problem." Rufus Sr. sighed, weary. "We've already taken care of that. I'll write you a letter explaining everything. For now, it's best you remain in the dark about the details." "Grandpa, can I visit you at the clinic?" Jake asked, his voice shaky. "No, son," Rufus Sr. said, his tone firm. "You need to stay away. It won't be easy to see, and I want to face my end alone. This is our final goodbye. Just one more thing. Take care of your mother. She's innocent in all of this, just like you." "I promise, Grandpa," Jake said, choking back emotion. "We'll look after her." With that, they said their goodbyes, and Jake, deeply moved, left with Gemma by his side. At Jake's apartment, they sat in silence, processing the painful news. After a while, Jake sighed deeply. "I'm going to miss him. He was like a father to me, more so than my own dad. All my father cared about was Rufus." Gemma, unable to find words, simply hugged and kissed Jake. "I know." 2 weeks later, Jake had just finished negotiating with a contractor to finalize their home in the woods when the sad news arrived. Jake had pushed to finish the house quickly, and Nathan had recommended this contractor, known for his speed and quality. Having decided to stay together, Jake remodeled the house, expanding it significantly. It would now feature 5 bedrooms, 2 living rooms, and all the necessary amenities. The house would be heated by geothermal energy, with solar panels and 2 wind turbines providing power. As Jake sat outside, holding the sad news in his hands, Gemma arrived. She tried to comfort him, though she could only do so partially. Jake looked at her and said, "It feels like something was ripped away from me." The following day, Jake received a call from the probate lawyer, summoning him to the reading of his grandfather's will. Jake, along with Gemma, prepared for what was to come when he noticed a black sedan trailing behind them. Without hesitation, he pulled into a mall parking lot. Just as he was about to step out, another black car pulled up alongside them. A woman emerged, signaling for him to roll down his window. Jake did so, keeping the engine running and his foot on the gas until she showed her ID. "We're with the FBI," she said calmly. "We're here to protect you until the case is resolved. When you attend the will reading, act as though we're not here. Everything will be made clear according to Mr. Van Dam's wishes." Inside the office, Jake left Gemma in the waiting room while he entered the conference room, where his father, mother, and Rufus Jr. were already seated. Rufus Jr. smirked. "Look who decided to show up. Here to see if there's anything left for you, huh? Don't worry, I'll make sure you get nothing, you little rat." The lawyer immediately intervened. "Control yourself, Mr. Van Dam, or I'll have you removed. Understood?" Rufus opened his mouth to argue, but the lawyer's voice grew firmer. I won't repeat myself. If you act out again, you'll be sitting outside waiting for the family to finish. Rufus muttered under his breath, but the lawyer moved forward, unyielding. I can't hear you. Do you understand? Or do I need to make it clearer that any more disruptions will get you thrown out? Randall, trying to intervene, froze when the lawyer raised a hand. The man clearly commanded respect. Good, the lawyer said, his tone shifting. Now that we've cleared up the theatrics, let's get to the matter at hand. Jake had a sudden thought. The lawyer reminded him of Gandalf from Lord of the Rings, calm and kind, but unrelenting when provoked. It was clear the lawyer was no one to underestimate. His attention snapped back to the proceedings when he heard his name called, and the lawyer began reading aloud. Everything I own in this office is to go to my only son, Jacob Randall Van Dam, who will now take over as chairman of the board of Van Dam Aeronautical Industries. What? Only son? But Dad is my father, isn't he? What's going on? Jake thought, his mind racing. His mother smiled faintly, as though this was no surprise, while Randall and Rufus erupted in fury. I'm his son! Rufus is my son, too. I'll make sure you pay for this, you thief! Randall shouted at the lawyer. The lawyer remained unmoved, pressing a button. Moments later, 4 imposing men appeared. They looked like they could overpower anyone with ease, and stood next to the agitated men. One of the men addressed Randall in a low growl. You really want to push this, old man? Randall instantly deflated, but Rufus, known for his temper, lunged at Jake, screaming, I'll eliminate you, you fool! Before Rufus could act, he was back in his seat, grimacing in pain as he rubbed his injured wrist. Once order was restored, the lawyer continued. Rufus, my friend, I foresaw this little outburst. That's why I asked these gentlemen to be here. Turning to Randall, he added, Mr. Van Dam, the DNA results show you are not his son. Your mother's divorce wasn't without cause. Therefore, Rufus Jr. is not your grandson. The lawyer paused, allowing the weight of his words to settle before continuing. When Mr. Van Dam learned of your treatment of your wife and your misconduct with the company's resources, he proposed to her. She accepted. And now, she's carrying Jacob Randall Van Dam's child. He let that hang in the air before adding, We also have notarized affidavits and DNA evidence that confirm the second son of Anna Van Dam Hansen and Rufus Van Dam is indeed Jacob Randall Van Dam. Randall was furious, practically vibrating with anger. You filthy strumpet, you cheated on me. You'll regret this. I'll sell you to a Russian brothel, he yelled at his wife. The lawyer, unfazed, motioned for 2 men to restrain Randall, who was flailing about in rage. Let's get this on record, the lawyer said calmly, and let's make sure these threats are documented. Turning to the 4 men holding Randall and Rufus in place, the lawyer continued, I'd like to make it clear that both of you are involved in major financial crimes. We have evidence of embezzlement, with you and your son stealing nearly $6 million from the company. You also funneled sensitive technology to rogue states and foreign competitors. He let the weight of that statement hang in the air before adding, Several government agencies, including the IRS and FBI, are investigating you. Whether you like it or not, you'll be cooperating with their inquiries. The lawyer glanced at the 4 men again. Take them away and hand them over to the authorities. Outside, Brooke watched as Jake walked in with Gemma. She had promised Gemma she would support Jake, but nothing prepared her for what she saw next. Half an hour later, her world crumbled as she saw Rufus and his father being escorted out, their identities checked, and then taken away in separate vehicles. What just happened? Brooke thought, her mind racing. A few moments later, panic set in as she grabbed one of the men escorting Rufus and Randall. I can't tell you, ma'am, the man said, his tone flat. All I know is they're going to help with the investigation, and it's going to take a while. Another man added, they're wanted for fraud, embezzlement, industrial espionage, and illegally transferring classified tech. I don't think we'll see them for the next 20 years. Brooke's stomach dropped. Who's going to run Van Dam Industries now? She asked, her voice shaking. The one who came in with that snitch in his arms, the second man replied, nodding toward Jake. Brooke felt like the world was spinning. She still didn't know exactly what had happened in that office, but Jake had come out victorious. The security and luxurious life that Rufus had promised her were now gone. Depressed, she walked to Rufus's car, found it unlocked, and the key fob sitting on the center console. She drove home in a daze. 1 month later, Brooke was struggling. Her modest income barely covered her basic living expenses, let alone the luxuries she had once enjoyed in her previous life. a life she now called her former one. She knew she had to either find a way to make more money or cut back on her spending. The children's school fees, in particular, were weighing heavily on her mind. Her only option, she thought, was to convince Jake to take the kids back into his care. This would mean getting him away from Gemma, the woman she saw as her rival. During her time with Rufus, Brooke had lived a life of excess, partying, drinking, and, at Rufus's insistence, undergoing extensive plastic surgery. She'd had a tummy tuck to tighten her abdomen after childbirth, a bosom lift, and a facelift. Her lips were plumped, and the result was a far cry from the natural beauty Jake had once been drawn to. Now, she resembled a more artificial version of herself, a far cry from the woman she used to be. She looked like an older version of Cher, without the youthful glow. Despite all this, Brooke believed that she could easily replace Gemma and win Jake back. One morning, she sat in her car, parked where she could see the front door of Jake's house. If Jake came out, she would leave and try again another time. But if it was Gemma, she would wait a few minutes, ensuring the coast was clear, then march up to the door and demand Jake back. Soon, a blue Nissan Rogue appeared and sped around the corner. Brooke checked her makeup one last time, waited 5 minutes, and then made her move. She walked up to the front door of the house, trying to look confident. She knew Jake had been involved in designing and building the house, and she needed to look at it carefully to know what to compliment. Maybe she could convince him to remodel it in a way that would suit him or her. The house itself seemed to rise from the hill, perched at the top with its facade facing north. The small front yard had 2 large windows beside the door, both covered by shutters. Brooke inhaled deeply, adjusted her shirt to accentuate her cleavage, and gave the door knocker a sharp pull. The knock echoed through the house, and she waited and waited. Just as she was about to leave, the door swung open, and Jake appeared. His face was unreadable, but he didn't invite her in. After a moment, Brooke spoke in a sultry tone. "Hi, Jake. You're looking good. Life seems to be treating you well." Jake's response was flat. "Brooke, I had a feeling you'd show up. What do you want?" "I just want to talk," Brooke said. "Aren't you going to invite me in?" Jake sighed. "Let's just get this over with," he muttered, clearly tired of the situation. "Come on in." He led her into his office, which was the closest room to the front door. Jake didn't want her snooping around the rest of the house. He already had a pretty good idea of what she wanted. "Sit down," Jake said, gesturing to a chair. He sat behind the desk. "So what is it, Brooke? What do you want from me?" Brooke looked around, trying to regain some composure. "Aren't you going to show me the rest of the house?" she asked. "No," Jake replied firmly. "Now, let's cut to the chase. Why are you here?" "Jake, don't you get it?" she began, her tone softening. "We belong together. We have a history. We have 2 kids together. I need you back." Jake stared at her, his thoughts racing. What's going on with her? Is she completely losing it? He shook his head and replied, "We do have a history. But from where I'm standing, that history looks very different from yours. You've got to be out of your mind if you think there's any chance of us getting back together." Brooke didn't flinch. She pressed on. "I admit I made mistakes, but I can't take care of the kids by myself. I need your help." "They're not even my kids," Jake shot back. "I've got proof they're from my half-brother, so why should I help you?" Brooke quickly countered, "But Jake, you've raised them. You've done a great job with them. Rufus never took care of them properly." Jake let out a long sigh. "I'm only doing this because my mom, their grandmother, asked me to. She begged me to take care of them. I'm doing it so you can't get your hands on any of that money. Don't get it twisted. I'm not trying to improve your life." Brooke was stunned. This was not how she had imagined the conversation going. Jake had always been willing to give in to her before, but now she was hitting a wall. She shifted gears, attempting a different approach. "Jake, I know I hurt you, but it was all because of Rufus. Now that he's gone, we can help each other. Think about it. I can be so good for you. I know how to please a man in ways that will blow your mind. Dump that cold woman, Gemma, and come back to me. We could be a family again, just the 4 of us." Jake was silent for a moment. Brooke felt a surge of confidence, thinking she had him right where she wanted him. But instead, Jake's response caught her off guard. "You're acting like a courtesan," Jake said coldly. "You look and act nothing like the woman I once knew. Our past together is one I'd rather forget. I don't want anything to do with you. Not now, not ever. As for the kids, I've made arrangements for them. Olivia will stay at St. Christopher's Crossing, and Brian will live with my mom until he goes to college. You won't be able to provide for him, so I've taken care of that. But don't expect a dime from me." Brooke was stunned into silence. Jake's words hit her like a physical blow. "You still owe me," Jake continued, his voice hard. "If you try anything, I'll file charges for fraud and extortion. I'll tell the authorities the kids aren't mine and that you cheated me out of money in the divorce. Now get out of here. I'm done." At that moment, they both heard the door creak open. Gemma appeared, poking her head around the corner. Jake glanced at her and said, "Come on in. My visitor is about to leave." Gemma entered, a glowing smile on her face. Her pregnancy was evident, and she walked over to Jake, giving him a kiss on the cheek. She whispered something only Jake could hear. "I was right. There are two of them." Jake's smile widened as he exchanged a look with Gemma. Brooke's mind raced as she finally realized what was happening. "You're pregnant," she blurted, her voice filled with shock. Gemma nodded proudly. "Yes, I'm pregnant. I'm giving Jake the children he deserves. We're going to have twins. I'm 3 months along. The first ultrasound didn't show both of them, but the latest one confirmed it. It's 2 boys." She kissed Jake again, this time on the lips, and then whispered, "Boys." Brooke's world came crashing down as she realized everything had fallen apart. "You can't do this to me," Brooke said, almost pleading. "You're going to take my children, your niece and nephew." Jake looked at her, his face hardening. "I don't know who Olivia and Brian are to me. They're your children, not mine." He paused before adding, "And as for Randall and Rufus Jr., I know the truth about them. They're not really related to me. I don't have anything to do with them anymore. Since their arrest, I haven't heard from them, and I'm not going to let you drag me into your mess anymore." Brooke felt the weight of her failure as Jake continued. "You have no real support left," he said. "Anna wanted nothing to do with you, and now you're completely isolated. You can't even get a job. So I've arranged something for you. I found you a job. Simple, physical work that will pay the rent and basic living expenses. It's the only option left for you." Brooke was speechless. She'd applied for jobs, but had been rejected every time. Now she was stuck, far from the children she loved. Jake handed her a card with an address and phone number. Gemma added, "This is your last chance to stay in touch with your kids. But if you don't take it, we'll wash our hands of you. Olivia will stay at St. Christopher's Crossing and Brian will live with Anna. They know what you did to the man they thought was their father." Gemma gestured for Brooke to leave. As she did, Gemma turned and said, "In the end, I won. I have Jake and I'm going to have his kids. You bet on the wrong man. I have the best man and you have nothing." Gemma glared at Brooke. "If you try anything with Jake, I will stop you. I'll protect him and make sure you never hurt him again. Do you understand?" Brooke stood frozen, unable to respond. "Yes, I understand," she whispered. "Good. No direct contact with Jake," Gemma warned. "Only through you. Now get out." As Brooke walked away, her entire world had crumbled. What she had once believed to be her future was now gone. Inside, Gemma was curled up in Jake's lap. She sighed, content. "I've waited almost 20 years for this. We're finally together, and it's all thanks to Brooke's foolishness." She stood, pulling Jake with her. "Time to practice," she said with a grin. "Practice for what?" Jake asked, confused. "For number 3, of course," she said, laughing, pulling him into the bedroom.
Hello and welcome to Cheating Tales Lab. We're thrilled to have you here today. Sit tight, because we've got a fascinating story lined up for you. Ready? Let's get right into it. The fog hung thick over the highway, transforming the world into a gray soup. Roman Conway squinted through the windshield of the ambulance, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. The call had come in moments ago. Multi-car pileup, unknown number of victims. Jesus, his partner, Francisco Gallagher, muttered as they rounded a bend. The scene unfolded before them like a nightmare tableau. Twisted metal, shattered glass, the acrid stench of burning rubber. Roman's training kicked in immediately. "Call for backup," he barked at Francisco as he jumped out of the ambulance. "We're gonna need every available unit." Roman moved swiftly, assessing the situation. A silver sedan caught his eye, or what was left of it. The front end was completely crushed, steam hissing from the crumpled hood. As he approached, he heard it, a woman's scream, high and desperate. "Help! Please, someone help me." Roman's heart rate spiked as he peered through the shattered driver's side window. The woman inside was heavily pregnant, her distended belly pressed against the steering wheel. Blood matted her dark hair, and her eyes were wide with panic. "Ma'am, I'm a paramedic," Roman called, already reaching for his tools. "Can you tell me your name?" "Sarah," she gasped. "Please, my baby. I think something's wrong." Roman's mind raced. The woman was pinned, and from the looks of it, in active labor. He'd never performed a field delivery in conditions like this, let alone a C-section. But as he watched Sarah's face contort with another contraction, he knew he had no choice. "Sarah, listen to me," he said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. "I'm going to get you out of here, but I need you to stay calm. Can you do that for me?" She nodded, tears streaming down her face. Roman worked quickly, cutting through the mangled door with practiced efficiency. As he eased Sarah onto the stretcher, he felt a warm gush of fluid. Her water had broken. "Francisco," he yelled, "I need you over here now." His partner appeared at his side, face grim as he took in the situation. "We can't move her," Roman said, his voice low. "Baby's coming now, and I think there might be complications. We're going to have to do this here." Francisco's eyes widened, but he nodded, already reaching for the necessary equipment. The next few minutes were a blur of focused intensity. Roman's hands moved with practiced precision as he prepared for the emergency C-section. Sarah's screams had faded to low moans, her eyes glassy with shock. "Stay with me, Sarah," Roman murmured as he made the first incision. "You're doing great." Time seemed to stretch and compress. Roman was vaguely aware of the chaos around him. The wail of approaching sirens, the shouts of other first responders. But his world had narrowed to this. The woman on the stretcher, the life growing inside her, and his own steady hands. And then, suddenly, a cry pierced the air. Roman lifted the tiny, squirming infant, a wave of relief washing over him. "It's a girl," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "She's perfect, Sarah." As he placed the baby on Sarah's chest, Roman became aware of the crowd that had gathered. His fellow paramedics, police officers, even some of the less injured victims of the pileup. They were all watching, faces a mix of awe and relief. In that moment, as he watched mother and child take their first breaths together, Roman felt a profound sense of purpose. This was why he did this job. This was what it meant to make a difference. The house was quiet when Roman got home, the events of the day still thrumming through his veins. He'd been lauded as a hero at the hospital, but all he wanted was a hot shower and his own bed. "Cassandra," he called out, dropping his keys on the side table. No answer. Roman frowned, moving through the house. It wasn't unusual for his wife to be out, but something felt off. He couldn't quite put his finger on it. In the kitchen, he noticed the blinking light on the answering machine. He hit play, half listening as he opened the fridge. "Mr. Conway, this is Janet from First National Bank. I'm calling about the recent large withdrawals from your joint account. We just wanted to verify." Roman froze, the carton of orange juice halfway to his lips. Large withdrawals? He hadn't made any large withdrawals. He set the juice down, a cold feeling settling in his stomach. Now that he thought about it, there had been other signs. Cassandra's increasingly secretive behavior, her vague explanations about where she'd been. Roman booted up their shared computer, a sick feeling of dread growing as he accessed their online banking. The transactions stood out like neon signs, thousands of dollars, withdrawn over the past few months. And there, buried in the credit card statements, charges at high-end hotels he'd never heard of. His hands shook as he closed the browser. This couldn't be happening. Not to them. Not to him. But even as denial rose up, a part of Roman knew. He'd seen it before, in the broken families he encountered on the job. The signs were all there. With a heavy heart, Roman made a decision. He'd install security cameras in the house. Just to be sure. Just to have proof, one way or the other. As he worked, carefully hiding the tiny cameras, Roman felt a part of himself hardening. Whatever happened next, he'd face it head-on. He was Roman Conway, after all. He saved lives for a living. He could save his own damn marriage. The annual Conway family reunion was in full swing. The backyard a riot of laughter, music, and the smell of barbecue. Roman moved through the crowd, plastering on a smile as he greeted relatives. Cassandra was across the yard, deep in conversation with his sister Monique. Roman watched his wife, searching for any sign of guilt or unease. But Cassandra laughed at something Monique said, looking for all the world like the perfect hostess. Uncle Roman. His nephew Tommy came barreling towards him, a water gun in hand. Come play with us. Roman was about to agree when a commotion at the gate caught his attention. His blood ran cold as he recognized the man stumbling into the yard. Louis Kaufman, the smooth-talking pharmaceutical rep who'd been hanging around Cassandra's office lately. And from the look of him, he was drunk off his ass. Where is she? Louis slurred, pushing past a startled Aunt Edna. Where's Cassandra? Roman moved quickly, intercepting Louis before he could get further into the yard. Louis, he said, keeping his voice low and steady. You need to leave. Now. But Louis wasn't having it. He shoved Roman, hard enough to make him stumble. You're a fool, Conway, he spat. Cassandra's been mine for years. Ever wonder why your kids look nothing like you? The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Roman felt a roaring in his ears, barely aware of the shocked gasps from his family members. But even as rage and pain threatened to overwhelm him, a part of his mind remained clear. Slowly, carefully, Roman reached into his pocket and pressed the button on the small recording device he'd taken to carrying. Then he met Louis's bloodshot eyes. Thanks for the public confession of paternity fraud, Louis, he said, his voice eerily calm. Louis's face contorted with fury. He lunged at Roman, fists swinging wildly. But Roman was ready. He sidestepped neatly, watching with satisfaction as Louis stumbled, his momentum carrying him forward. There was a sickening crack as Louis's face met the edge of the picnic table. He went down hard, blood streaming from his mouth. In the stunned silence that followed, Roman turned to face his family. Cassandra stood frozen, her face a mask of horror and guilt. Party's over, Roman said, his voice carrying across the yard. I think it's time for everyone to go home. As his relatives filed out, murmuring in shocked disbelief, Roman felt a strange sense of calm settle over him. The worst had happened, yes, but he'd faced it, and he'd survived. Now, it was time to fight. Arthur Lowe's office was a sanctuary of mahogany and leather, the kind of place that whispered of old money and discreet solutions. Roman sat across from his old friend, the weight of betrayal heavy on his shoulders. You're sure about this? Arthur asked, his fingers steepled under his chin. Once we file, there's no going back. Roman nodded, his jaw set. I'm sure. You've seen the evidence. Arthur sighed, reaching for a thick manila folder. I have. And it's damning, Roman. The bank statements, the hotel receipts, the security footage. It's more than enough to prove infidelity. And the paternity fraud? Roman's voice was barely above a whisper. That's trickier, Arthur admitted. Louis's drunken confession at the reunion helps, but we'll need DNA tests to prove it conclusively. Are you prepared for that? To potentially learn that the children you've raised are not mine? Roman finished. I have to know, Arthur. For their sake as much as mine. Arthur nodded, his expression grim. All right, I'll file the papers today. We're going for full custody, citing Cassandra's negligence and deceit. But Roman, you need to be prepared. This is going to get ugly. As if on cue, Arthur's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, his frown deepening. It's already started. The Tribune's running a story on the hero paramedic's shocking divorce. Your private life is about to become very public. Roman closed his eyes, feeling the weight of the world pressing down on him. But when he opened them again, there was steel in his gaze. Let them come. I've got nothing to hide. As Roman left Arthur's office, he felt a strange mix of dread and relief. The truth was out now, for better or worse. He thought of his children. Were they his children? Waiting at home, blissfully unaware of the storm about to break over their lives. He'd shield them as best he could, but he knew that innocence, once lost, could never truly be regained. The next few weeks were a blur of legal meetings, DNA tests, and avoiding reporters camped outside his house. Roman threw himself into his work, finding solace in the familiar routines of saving lives. But even there, He couldn't escape the whispers, the sidelong glances from colleagues who'd read the salacious headlines. It was Francisco who finally cornered him in the locker room after a particularly grueling shift. "You can't keep this bottled up forever, man," he said, his usual jovial tone replaced with concern. "Talk to me. What's really going on?" Roman stared at his locker, the words stuck in his throat. But Francisco waited patiently, and finally, the dam broke. Roman told him everything. The affair, the paternity doubts, the custody battle looming on the horizon. When he finished, Francisco let out a low whistle. "Jesus, Roman, I had no idea it was that bad. But listen, you're not alone in this, okay? Whatever you need, I've got your back." Roman nodded, grateful for the support. As he left the station that night, he felt a little lighter. He couldn't control the media circus or the outcome of the legal battle, but he wasn't facing it alone. That, at least, was something. The first cases trickled in slowly, barely a blip on the radar of Chicago's bustling emergency rooms. A few cases of severe flu, nothing too out of the ordinary for the tail end of winter. But then the trickle became a stream, and before anyone fully realized what was happening, it had turned into a flood. Roman stumbled out of the ambulance, his eyes burning from lack of sleep. This was his fourth straight shift, and the city showed no signs of slowing down. As he wheeled another gasping patient into the overcrowded ER, he caught sight of Dr. Velma Reeves, the hospital's chief of emergency medicine. Dr. Reeves was a force of nature, her silver hair pulled back in a severe bun, her eyes sharp behind wire-rimmed glasses. She barked orders with the precision of a military commander, somehow managing to bring order to the chaos of the overwhelmed hospital. "Conway," she called out as Roman passed. "I need you for a moment." Roman followed her into a quiet corner, his exhaustion momentarily forgotten in the face of her intensity. "I've been watching you," Dr. Reeves said without preamble. "You've been working nonstop since this outbreak began. Your dedication is impressive." Roman shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. "Just doing my job, ma'am." Dr. Reeves's eyes narrowed. "No, it's more than that. I've read about your personal situation." She held up a hand as Roman opened his mouth to protest. "I'm not here to gossip. I'm here to offer my support." She pulled out a business card, pressing it into Roman's hand. "I understand you're in the middle of a custody battle. If you need a character witness, someone to speak to your work ethic and dedication, I'd be happy to testify." Roman stared at the card, a lump forming in his throat. "Dr. Reeves, thank you. I don't know what to say." "Say you'll get some rest," she replied, her tone softening slightly. "You're no good to anyone if you work yourself to death. Now go home, Conway." "That's an order." As Roman left the hospital, he felt a glimmer of hope for the first time in weeks. The custody hearings were looming, but now he had an unexpected ally in his corner. Maybe, just maybe, things were starting to look up. But even as he thought it, he couldn't shake the nagging feeling that Cassandra and Lewis weren't done fighting dirty. He'd have to stay on his toes, ready for whatever they might throw at him next. Johnny Quick was not a man burdened by an excess of journalistic integrity. He preferred to think of himself as pragmatic, a survivor in the cutthroat world of modern media. So when Lewis Kaufman approached him with a juicy story and a fat envelope of cash, Johnny didn't hesitate. "We want you to write a series of articles," Lewis said, his smile oily in the dim light of the bar. Questioning Roman Conway's competence as a paramedic, Johnny raised an eyebrow. "Conway? The guy who delivered that baby on the highway? That's going to be a tough sell, buddy." Lewis's smile didn't waver. "That's why we're paying you the big bucks, Johnny. Get creative. Dig up some dirt. There's got to be something in his past we can use." As Lewis laid out the details of their plan, Johnny felt a twinge of something. Not quite guilt. He'd smothered that particular emotion years ago. But maybe a flicker of unease. Still, money was money, and times were tough. He'd do the job. The first article hit like a bombshell. "Hero paramedic. Savior or menace?" The headline screamed. Johnny had done his homework, dredging up every minor complaint, every moment of hesitation in Roman's career, and spinning it into a narrative of incompetence and recklessness. Roman stared at the newspaper, his hands shaking with a mix of rage and disbelief. The article was a masterpiece of innuendo and half-truths, painting him as a danger to the very people he'd sworn to protect. "This is bullshit," Francisco snarled, snatching the paper away. "Everyone knows you're the best damn paramedic in the city." But the damage was done. As the days went by and more articles appeared, Roman could feel the tide of public opinion turning against him. Whispers followed him everywhere he went. Parents pulled their children closer when he passed on the street. Even some of his colleagues began to eye him warily, as if wondering if there might be some truth to the accusations. The stress was taking its toll. Roman found himself snapping at the slightest provocation, dark circles growing under his eyes as sleep became increasingly elusive. It was Francisco who finally intervened, dragging Roman to a rundown community center on the edge of town. "What are we doing here?" Roman asked, eyeing the graffiti-covered walls skeptically. Francisco grinned. "You need an outlet, man. Something to take your mind off all this crap. They run a youth mentoring program here. I figured, who better to inspire some troubled kids than Chicago's finest paramedic?" Roman opened his mouth to protest, but Francisco was already pushing him through the door. Inside, a group of teenagers lounged on mismatched furniture, eyeing the newcomers with a mix of curiosity and suspicion. "Listen up, you little delinquents," Francisco announced cheerfully. "This here is Roman Conway. He's going to be volunteering with us for a while. Try not to scare him off, all right?" As the teens gathered around, their initial wariness giving way to genuine interest, Roman felt something shift inside him. Here, in this dingy community center, he wasn't the subject of scandalous headlines or vicious rumors. He was just a guy with some stories to tell and some wisdom to share. For the first time in weeks, Roman felt the knot in his chest begin to loosen. He couldn't control what the papers said about him or how the custody battle would play out. But here, in this moment, he could make a difference. And maybe, just maybe, that would be enough to see him through the storm. As the weeks went by, Roman fell into a new routine. Work, custody hearings, and evenings at the youth center. The articles continued, each more outrageous than the last. But Roman found himself caring less and less. He had bigger battles to fight. It was at the youth center that he met Rosalie, a social worker with kind eyes and a no-nonsense attitude. She didn't seem to care about the headlines or the rumors. She just saw a man trying his best to make a difference. "You're good with them?" she said one evening, watching as Roman demonstrated basic first aid to a group of enthralled teenagers. "They respond to you." Roman shrugged, but he couldn't hide the small smile tugging at his lips. "They're good kids. Just need someone to believe in them." Rosalie nodded, her expression thoughtful. "Sometimes that's all any of us need." As they stood there, watching the teens practice CPR on battered mannequins, Roman felt a spark of something he hadn't experienced in a long time. Hope. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he knew he'd face them head-on. He was Roman Conway, after all. Saving lives was what he did best. Monique Conway had always been the family wild child. While Roman followed the straight and narrow path, she'd zigzagged through life, leaving a trail of broken hearts and unpaid bar tabs in her wake. But beneath the carefree exterior beat the heart of a lioness when it came to her big brother. The seedy bar on the outskirts of Chicago was Monique's natural habitat. She nursed a whiskey, sharp eyes scanning the crowd. When Cassandra and Louis walked in, Monique nearly choked on her drink. What the hell were they doing here? She slouched lower in her booth, pulling the brim of her hat down. The estranged couple didn't notice her as they slid into a nearby booth, heads bent close in conspiratorial whispers. Monique's curiosity got the better of her. She casually moved to the jukebox, pretending to flip through song selections while straining to catch snippets of their conversation. "Running out of options," Cassandra hissed. "The custody hearing is in 2 weeks, and that idiot Dr. Reeves is going to testify for Roman." Louis knocked back a shot, his handsome face twisted with frustration. "We need something big. Something that'll destroy his credibility once and for all." Cassandra's next words sent a chill down Monique's spine. "What about the substances at the hospital? If we could make it look like Roman's been stealing." Louis's eyes lit up with malicious glee. "Plant some stolen pharmaceuticals in his paramedic kit. A conviction like that would ruin him professionally and in the custody case. Exactly, Cassandra purred. I still have access to the house. I could easily slip something into his kit before his next shift. Monique's hand froze on the jukebox. This was bad. Really bad. She needed to warn Roman. As she slipped out of the bar, Monique's mind raced. She'd made more than her fair share of mistakes in life, but she'd never stooped to the level of framing someone for a crime. The fact that Cassandra could do this to Roman, the father of her children, made Monique's blood boil. She fumbled for her phone, nearly dropping it in her haste to call Roman. When his voicemail picked up, she swore under her breath. Roman, it's Mo, call me back ASAP. It's about Cassandra and Louis. They're planning something, and it's not good. Monique paced outside the bar, chain-smoking as she waited for Roman to call back. When her phone finally buzzed, she nearly jumped out of her skin. Mo? What's going on? Roman's voice was tense, wary. We've got a problem, big bro, Monique said, her voice low. I just overheard Cassandra and Louis plotting to frame you for substance theft at the hospital. They're going to plant stolen meds in your kit. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then, Roman's voice, cold and determined. Tell me everything. Arthur Lowe's office had become a war room. Roman sat at the head of the conference table, flanked by Monique and Arthur. Dr. Velma Reeves paced by the window, her normally impassive face clouded with concern. This is a serious accusation, Dr. Reeves said, her voice clipped. If they succeed in planting those substances, the consequences would be catastrophic. Not just for Roman's career, but for the entire hospital. Roman nodded. Which is why we need to catch them in the act. We can't just accuse them without proof. They'll deny everything, and it'll look like I'm trying to smear them out of spite. Arthur leaned forward, his lawyer's mind already formulating a plan. We need to set up a sting operation. Let them think their plan is working, then catch them red-handed. It's risky, Monique argued. What if something goes wrong? Roman could lose everything. I don't have much left to lose, Roman said quietly. He thought of his children, of the life he'd built. But I have everything to gain. I'm tired of being on the defensive. It's time we took the fight to them. Dr. Reeves nodded approvingly. I'll coordinate with hospital security. We'll set up hidden cameras in the locker room. Roman, you'll need to act completely normal. Give them no reason to suspect you're onto them. As they hammered out the details of their counterplan, Roman felt a strange sense of calm settle over him. For months, he'd been reacting, always one step behind Cassandra and Louis's scheming. Now, finally, he had a chance to take control. The next few days were a masterclass in deception. Roman went about his duties at the hospital with his usual dedication, all while knowing that Cassandra and Louis were plotting his downfall. He felt their eyes on him, watching for any sign of weakness or suspicion. On the night of the planned frame-up, Roman's nerves were stretched to the breaking point. He clocked in for his shift as usual, exchanging small talk with his colleagues. As he approached his locker, he could almost feel the trap about to spring. Conway, Dr. Reeves's voice rang out across the locker room. I need you in my office. Now. Roman turned, catching a glimpse of Cassandra lurking near the row of lockers. Her face was a mask of frustrated anger. He suppressed a smile as he followed Dr. Reeves out. In her office, Dr. Reeves spoke loudly for the benefit of the hidden microphones. I'm putting you on administrative leave, effective immediately. There have been concerns raised about your conduct. Roman played his part, protesting his innocence with just the right amount of confusion and indignation. As he stormed out of her office, he saw Cassandra slip into the locker room. The trap was set. Hours later, Roman sat in a dimly lit security office, watching the footage unfold on multiple screens. There was Cassandra, furtively approaching his locker. Louis appeared moments later, keeping watch as she worked the lock. Roman's fists clenched as he watched his estranged wife plant the stolen substances in his kit. It was one thing to know what she was planning, another entirely to see it happening. Just as Cassandra closed the locker, the lights in the room flared to life. Police officers swarmed in, led by Dr. Reeves herself. Cassandra Kaufman, Louis Kaufman, you're under arrest for attempted evidence tampering and conspiracy to commit fraud, the lead officer announced. The look of shock and betrayal on Cassandra's face as she was led away in handcuffs was almost satisfying. Almost. As the adrenaline of the sting operation wore off, Roman felt a deep weariness settle into his bones. This wasn't a victory to celebrate. It was the final nail in the coffin of his marriage, the death of the family he'd thought he had. But as he watched the police car carrying Cassandra and Lewis drive away, he also felt something else. Hope. For the first time in months, the future didn't look quite so bleak. The courtroom was packed. A sea of faces all turned towards the elevated bench where Judge Ethel Blackwell presided. Roman sat at the plaintiff's table, Arthur at his side. Across the aisle, Cassandra and Lewis looked pale and defeated, their lawyer whispering urgently in their ears. Judge Blackwell's gavel cracked like a gunshot, silencing the murmurs of the crowd. In the matter of Conway versus Kaufman, this court is now in session. What followed was a brutal dissection of Cassandra and Lewis's actions. Arthur presented a mountain of evidence, financial records showing Cassandra's embezzlement from the joint accounts, DNA tests proving Lewis's paternity of the children, and most damning of all, the video footage of their attempted frame-up. Dr. Reeves took the stand, her testimony a scathing indictment of the couple's character. In all my years of medicine, I have never encountered such a blatant disregard for ethics and human decency, she declared, her eyes flashing with righteous anger. As the proceedings wore on, Roman found his gaze drawn to Cassandra, the woman he'd loved, the mother of his children. How had it come to this? He searched her face for any sign of remorse, any flicker of the person he'd once known. But all he saw was a mask of cold defiance. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Judge Blackwell cleared her throat. The courtroom fell silent, every ear straining to catch her words. The actions of the defendants, Cassandra and Lewis Kaufman, are nothing short of reprehensible, she began, her voice ringing with authority. They have engaged in a systematic campaign of fraud, defamation, and attempted evidence tampering. Their disregard for the law and for basic human decency is shocking. She turned her steely gaze on Cassandra and Lewis. You face multiple criminal charges, including fraud, defamation, and attempted evidence tampering. This court recommends the maximum sentences allowed by law. A gasp rippled through the courtroom. Roman sat very still, hardly daring to breathe. Furthermore, Judge Blackwell continued, in the matter of child custody, this court grants full custody to Roman Conway, along with a substantial financial settlement to be paid by the defendants. The gavel fell with a final, decisive crack. It was over. As the bailiffs moved to lead Cassandra and Lewis away, Roman stood. He needed to say something, to find some closure in this moment. Cassandra. Lewis. His voice carried in the sudden hush of the courtroom. They turned to face him, Cassandra's eyes brimming with unshed tears, Lewis's face a mask of sullen defeat. You tried to destroy everything I love, Roman said, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions raging inside him. I'll never forgive your betrayal, but I refuse to let it define me. I'll use this experience to be a better father and a better paramedic. As they were led away, Roman felt a weight lift from his shoulders. It wasn't happiness, not yet, but it was the first step on the road to healing. Outside the courthouse, a crowd of reporters waited, hungry for a statement. Roman brushed past them, ignoring their shouted questions. He had more important things to focus on now. His children were waiting, and he had a lot of lost time to make up for. Epilogue. Months passed, the seasons turning as Chicago slowly recovered from the flu outbreak that had brought the city to its knees. On a crisp autumn morning, Roman stood before a crowd gathered in Millennium Park, his paramedic's uniform crisp and freshly pressed. Mayor Lori Lightfoot approached the podium, her face solemn. Today, we honor those who went above and beyond during our city's darkest hours. Paramedics, nurses, doctors, all the unsung heroes who risked their lives to save others. But one man stands out for his exceptional bravery and dedication. She turned to Roman, a smile breaking through her serious demeanor. Roman Conway, please step forward to receive this commendation for your tireless work during the influenza outbreak. As Roman accepted the award, his eyes scanned the crowd. There was Francisco, grinning from ear to ear and giving him a thumbs up. Dr. Reeves stood nearby, her usual stern expression softened with pride. Arthur nodded approvingly, a rare smile on his face. And there, in the front row, were the faces that mattered most. His children, their eyes shining with a mix of pride and love that made Roman's heart swell. Beside them stood Rosalie, the social worker he'd met at the youth center. She caught his eye and winked, her smile warm and encouraging. As the applause died down, Roman stepped up to the microphone. He looked out over the sea of faces, feeling the weight of all he'd been through, all he'd overcome. "Thank you," he began, his voice steady. "This award is an honor, but the real heroes are the people of Chicago. The patients who fought so hard to survive. The families who supported them. My fellow first responders who never gave up, no matter how dire things got." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "The past year has been challenging, to say the least. There were times when I thought I'd lost everything. My marriage, my children, my career. It all seemed to be slipping away." Roman's gaze fell on his children, their faces a mirror of his own determination. "But I learned something important. Our strength isn't measured by the challenges we face, but by how we face them. Every setback, every betrayal, every moment of doubt. They're all opportunities to become better, stronger versions of ourselves." He smiled, feeling a sense of peace settle over him. "I stand here today not as a hero, but as a man who's been given a second chance. A chance to be a better father, a better paramedic, a better person. And I promise you this, I won't waste it." As the crowd erupted in cheers, Roman stepped back from the podium. He made his way to his family, scooping up his youngest in a bear hug as the others crowded around. Rosalie squeezed his hand, her eyes shining with pride and something more, a promise of a future filled with love and trust. Roman Conway had walked through fire and come out the other side. He'd lost much, but gained so much more. As he stood there, surrounded by the people he loved, he knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, he was ready to face them. Not alone, but with the strength of family, friends, and a community that had seen him at his lowest and lifted him up. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be difficult conversations with his children, long nights of self-doubt, and the constant challenge of rebuilding trust. But for the first time in a long time, Roman felt truly, deeply hopeful. He had weathered the storm and emerged stronger for it. As the ceremony wound down and the crowd began to disperse, Roman looked out over the Chicago skyline. This city had seen him broken, but it had also seen him rise. Whatever the future held, he was ready for it. One life at a time, one day at a time, Roman Conway would continue to do what he did best, save lives and make a difference. The end.
This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comment section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy the story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.
Welcome back, and thank you for tuning into Cheating Tales Lab. We appreciate every single one of you. We'd love to know what part of the world are you watching from right now. Let us know in the comments. Now, let's dive into today's story. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows through the kitchen windows as James Mitchell mechanically went through his post-shift routine. 24 hours of back-to-back emergency calls had left him exhausted, but the cryptic message from Andrea's school principal had sent him rushing home instead of catching his usual recovery sleep at the station. "Fourth time this month," he muttered, checking his phone again. No response to his texts or calls. Andrea had never missed a day of teaching in 12 years. Her perfect attendance record was practically legendary at Roosevelt High. James's firefighter uniform still carried the acrid smell of smoke from their last call, a warehouse fire that had nearly gone critical. He would have changed, but something about the principal's tone had set off warning bells in his mind. 15 years on the job had taught him to trust those instincts. The house felt wrong. Andrea's car was in the driveway, but the usual sounds of NPR or her favorite classical music station were missing. Instead, a faint bass line pulsed from somewhere below. The basement door stood slightly open, warm air carrying up unfamiliar music. "Andrea?" James called out, his voice echoing in the empty kitchen. The basement lights were on, shadows moving across the sliver of light visible through the door gap. The music suddenly cut off. Footsteps creaked on the stairs, and James felt his world tilt sideways as two figures emerged from the basement. Andrea, her dark hair disheveled and lipstick smeared, followed by Matthew Reynolds, his best friend of 20 years and fellow firefighter. Well, Andrea drawled, her normally warm voice dripping with contempt. Look who's home early. Done playing hero for the day? James stared at Matthew's hand resting possessively on his wife's hip, the same hand they'd clasped in brotherhood countless times during rescues, the same friend who'd stood as his best man. What's going on here? James kept his voice steady, though his hands had unconsciously clenched into fists. Andrea's laugh held no trace of the woman he'd married. Oh, don't act so shocked, loser. Did you really think I was happy playing the devoted wife while you ran off to save everyone else? She leaned back against Matthew, who smirked with undisguised satisfaction. 5 years, she continued, clearly savoring each word. Matthew and I have been meeting right here in your precious basement. All those renovations he helped with? We turned it into our little love nest while you were pulling your heroic double shifts. Matthew finally spoke, his familiar voice now twisted with mockery. Someone had to keep her satisfied, brother. You were always too busy with the job, weren't you? Missing dinners, holidays, anniversaries. A woman has needs. And now, Andrea's hand drifted to her stomach in a gesture that made James's blood run cold. We're going to have what you could never give me. A family. Her smile turned cruel. Oh, and don't bother running to tell Claire about this. Your precious friend's wife already caught us months ago. She knows we deserve each other. James stood perfectly still, his fire captain's training kicking in automatically. Assess, control, respond. His voice came out calm, almost detached. How long has Claire known? Long enough, Matthew shrugged. She's not as fragile as you think. Unlike you, she can handle the truth about what she married. The truth? James's laugh held no humor. That's rich coming from you, Matt. Real rich. Andrea's expression flickered for just a moment before hardening again. Don't try to play the victim here. You drove me to this with your constant absence. Your precious job always came first. Matthew actually makes time for me. Time to do what exactly? James's eyes swept over them both. Besides turning my basement into your personal brothel? Matthew took a threatening step forward. Watch your mouth, brother. You might be a hero at work, but this isn't your firehouse. No, James agreed quietly. It's my house. My basement. My wife. His gaze locked onto Andrea. At least for now. Andrea's sneer wavered slightly at his tone. What's that supposed to mean? It means, James said, his voice dropping to a dangerous calm, that you both seem awfully confident for people with so much to lose. Before either could respond, James's phone buzzed. The display showed a 911 dispatch alert. Domestic disturbance reported at 1542 Oak Street, Reynolds residence. James looked up slowly, meeting Matthew's suddenly uncertain gaze. Trouble at home, brother? Alone in the kitchen, James moved with mechanical precision, years of emergency response training taking over. His mind compartmentalized the betrayal, focusing instead on patterns and evidence. He pulled out his laptop, accessing the department's scheduling system. The past year's shift records told a story. Every time James had been scheduled for a 24-hour rotation, Matthew had called in sick at least once during that period. The dates formed a damning pattern. Computers running slow today. Tom, their shift supervisor, had complained just last week. Matt's been reorganizing all the old scheduling files. Said he was helping streamline things. James opened his personal calendar, cross-referencing dates. The department fundraisers Andrea had organized, 6 in the past year alone. Matthew had volunteered to handle the treasury for each one, insisting his business degree made him perfect for the job. You're lucky to have such a dedicated wife, Chief Harrison had said at the last firefighters' ball. Andrea's raised more money than any previous coordinator. The basement renovation flickered through his memory. Matthew had spent weeks down there, insisting on doing the electrical work himself. Can't trust these modern contractors, he'd said. Besides, what are brothers for? James pulled up his home's electrical bills for the past year. The usage patterns showed suspicious spikes, far beyond what 2 people should consume. The basement's separate circuit, Matthew's idea, didn't register on the main panel readings. His phone chimed with a text from Claire, dated just 3 days ago. Dinner still on for Saturday? Can't believe our 15th anniversary party is next month. Andrea's been so helpful with the planning. Something cold settled in James's gut. If Claire had really caught them months ago, why was she still planning celebrations? Why keep up the pretense in private messages? The dispatch alert about the Reynolds residence kept flashing on his phone. James pulled up Matthew's personnel file, using his captain's access. 3 domestic disturbance calls in the past year, all mysteriously missing from the official record. The responding officers' names had been redacted. Computer issues, Matthew had explained during their last system upgrade. Had to clean up some corrupted files. You know how it is with these old systems. The pattern crystallized with brutal clarity. Not just the affair. Something bigger was happening. The fundraisers, the electrical work, the missing records. His phone buzzed again. Another 911 dispatch. Female victim at Reynolds residence requesting medical attention. Possible domestic assault. James grabbed his keys, his mind already mapping out next steps. If his suspicions were right, the affair was just the surface of a much darker truth. The emergency room at St. Mary's Hospital buzzed with its usual controlled chaos, but James moved through it with practiced ease. He'd transported enough victims here to know the quiet corners, the places where privacy still existed. He found Claire Reynolds in one of those corners, hunched on an exam table. Her designer blouse, the one she'd worn proudly at last month's department dinner, was spattered with blood from her split lip. A bruise bloomed across her left cheekbone, already turning purple. James! Her voice cracked as she looked up. How did you? Got the dispatch call, he said quietly, pulling up a chair. Want to tell me what happened? Claire's hands trembled as she clutched a tissue. I found receipts, she whispered. Strange deposits in our joint account. When I asked Matthew about them, she gestured to her face. First time. James kept his voice neutral, professional.
No.
The words seemed to deflate her. But he always said no one would believe me. That you'd never accept anything bad about your best friend. A bitter laugh escaped her. He said the department would back him up. That he'd taken care of any incidents. James pulled out his phone, setting it to record. Tell me everything, Claire. Start with when you actually found out about Andrea. Claire's head snapped up. Andrea? What about? Understanding dawned in her eyes. Oh God, they told you I knew? That I was okay with it? Fresh tears spilled. James, I just found out today. The receipts, they had her name on them. When I confronted him, that's when he hit you? She nodded. He said I couldn't prove anything, that he'd make sure any report disappeared, just like the others. Her voice hardened. But he was wrong about one thing. I did keep proof. Claire reached into her purse with shaking hands, withdrawing a USB drive. Bank statements, text messages, photos of the other times she swallowed hard. I was afraid no one would believe me without evidence. James pocketed the drive. You did good, Claire. Real good. He stood, decision made. I need to make some calls. You okay here for a minute? She managed a weak smile. The nurse said Detective Sarah Martinez is coming. She specializes in domestic cases. Sarah's good people. James nodded. She'll take care of you. In the hallway, James made 2 calls. The first to Internal Affairs, requesting an urgent review of all domestic incident reports involving Matthew Reynolds, with special attention to deleted or modified records. The second call went to Roosevelt High School Board. This is Captain James Mitchell, he said calmly. I need to discuss some irregularities in the fundraising accounts managed by Andrea Mitchell and Matthew Reynolds. Specifically, large discrepancies between reported donations and actual deposits. He ended the calls, staring at the phone for a long moment. The pieces were falling into place, forming a picture far uglier than a simple affair. The basement electrical work, the missing funds, the corrupted records. Claire's voice echoed in his mind. I did keep proof. James smiled grimly. It was time to see exactly what his wife and best friend had been hiding in his basement. Sometimes, he reflected, the best way to fight fire was to let it burn hot enough for everyone to see the truth in its light. James sat in his dimly lit home office at 3 a.m., surrounded by stacks of documents and 3 computer monitors. The digital records from Claire's USB drive had opened a Pandora's box of deception. Bank statements revealed a joint account under Matthew and Andrea's names with regular cash deposits, each coinciding perfectly with the fundraisers they'd organized. Captain Mitchell? Sarah Chin's voice crackled through his phone. The department's forensic accountant had been working through the night at his request. Those fundraising records you sent? It's worse than we thought. Much worse. 20 minutes later, James stood in Sarah's office at the station, watching as she pulled up spreadsheet after damning spreadsheet on her dual monitors. See this pattern? She highlighted a series of transactions. Every charity drive, every department fundraiser for the past 3 years. The reported totals never matched the actual deposits. We're looking at nearly $200,000 in discrepancies, but that's just the surface. James leaned closer, his jaw tightening. Explain. The money moves through a series of shell accounts before landing here. Sarah pulled up another document. 5 different charitable foundations, all registered to vacant offices. Matthew set them up using his treasurer credentials. Each one received donations from the fundraisers before the money disappeared into offshore accounts. And no one caught this? Matthew was methodical. He'd submit final reports weeks late, claiming he needed time to reconcile cash donations. By then, everyone was focused on the next event. Sarah's fingers flew across her keyboard. But he got cocky, started taking bigger cuts, getting sloppy with the paperwork. James's phone buzzed, a text from Tom, the station's senior electrician. Cap, found something in the electrical plans. Power draw calculations for your basement are way off. This setup, it's designed for industrial-grade ventilation, temperature control, specialized lighting circuits. Classic indoor growing operation setup. Send me everything, James ordered, then turned back to Sarah. The basement renovation timeline? Sarah pulled up the permits. Filed 8 months ago. Electrical work signed off by... She paused, frowning. That's odd. Inspector's signature is smudged on all of them, but the authorization number matches 3 other inspections Matthew handled personally. Cross-reference those inspections with property records. Sarah's eyes widened as the results populated her screen. All commercial properties. All recently sold to the same holding company that keeps appearing in the charity accounts. James's phone rang. Detective Martinez from Narcotics. Captain, got those surveillance photos you asked for. Last 3 months of activity around Roosevelt High. You need to see this. The photos showed Andrea's car parked behind the school gym during various events, basketball games, parent-teacher conferences, fundraisers. In each image, different vehicles would appear, stay for exactly 7 minutes, then leave. Those license plates? Martinez continued. They match known associates of the Santiago illegal substance ring. Your wife's been using school events as cover for distribution. James felt cold rage building, but his voice remained steady. The basement wasn't just their love nest. They turned my home into a distribution hub. He dialed a number he'd kept for emergencies. Jack? Mitchell here. Remember that warehouse fire where you lost your whole surveillance operation? Time to call in that favor. I need your team. Off the books. Sarah looked up from her computer. Want me to alert internal affairs? Not yet. James's smile held no warmth. First, we document everything. Every transaction, every meeting, every fake inspection. Let them think they're still invisible. They used your reputation as cover, Sarah said softly. Your own home. James cut her off. They used everyone. The department, the school, Claire, all those kids at fundraisers. His expression hardened. Now we use their overconfidence against them. The Roosevelt High Personnel Office buzzed with quiet tension as Linda Martinez, head of HR, closed her office door. She'd worked at the school for 20 years, but her hands shook as she placed a thick file on her desk. This is difficult, Captain Mitchell. She pushed the file forward. Your wife's personnel records contained irregularities. When you requested the audit, we found things that didn't add up. James opened the file to find medical forms bearing his forged signature. According to these documents, his bout with smoke inhalation 2 years ago had left him permanently infertile, a convenient explanation for Andrea's suspicious pregnancy. She told everyone you refused fertility treatments, Linda explained, anger creeping into her voice. Said you were too focused on your career to consider alternatives. The staff took up collections for her private medical consultations. Even the students held bake sales. How much did they raise? Over $15,000 in the past year alone. Linda pulled out more papers. But the doctor she claimed to see, Dr. Samuel Richardson, doesn't exist. The clinic address leads to an abandoned strip mall. James's phone buzzed with updates from Jack's surveillance team. Multiple transactions observed during school events. Known dealers entering through gym entrance. A. Mitchell handling exchanges personally. M. Reynolds conducting building inspections immediately after each transaction. Linda wasn't finished. There's more. These permission slips for after-school activities? All forged. Parents' signatures don't match our records. She's been using legitimate events as cover for something else. The fundraisers? Same pattern. Events scheduled strategically, always with restricted access areas. Matthew would conduct fire inspections the same day, claiming certain sections were off-limits for safety checks. James's phone rang. Claire's number. James. Her voice trembled. I found Matthew's old papers. Records from Colorado. She took a shaky breath. This isn't the first time. 3 years before we moved here, he had an affair with another firefighter's wife. They were caught stealing department funds. What happened? His chief gave him a choice. Resign quietly or face charges. I believed him when he said it was a mistake. Claire's laugh held years of accumulated bitterness. I helped him start over here, convinced the chief to give him a second chance. God, I was such a fool. You weren't the fool, Claire. You were just another part of their cover. James closed the file on his desk. I need everything you found. Then pack a bag and go somewhere safe. Don't tell Matthew. Already gone. I'm at my sister's. Her voice steadied. I'm done protecting him. After seeing what they did to you, to everyone. No more. The wall of monitors in Jack's surveillance van painted a damning picture. Hidden cameras captured every angle of the sophisticated growing operation concealed behind the basement's false walls. Tom, reviewing the electrical schematics, shook his head in disgust. Brilliant setup in a sick way, he muttered. Use the renovation to mask everything. Extra power draw hidden in normal usage patterns. Ventilation disguised as home improvement. Even added a backup generator so power outages wouldn't kill the plants. James watched Andrea enter the basement on one screen. Her phone conversation picked up clearly by the hidden microphones. No, listen carefully, she snapped. Schedules changed. Too many parents hanging around for that fundraiser next week. We need to move everything before the audit. She paused. Fine. Tell them to meet at the usual spot behind the gym. Matthew's already doctored the inspection records. Another screen showed Matthew at Roosevelt High's loading dock, exchanging paperwork with a nervous-looking building supervisor. Money changed hands, disappearing into Matthew's jacket. Third falsified inspection this week, Jack noted. Buildings all match known distribution points. He's creating a paper trail showing they're unsafe for regular inspections. Perfect cover for restricted access, James agreed. Send everything to these contacts. He handed over a list of email addresses. School board, fire department internal affairs, DEA task force. Time it for maximum impact. Simultaneous notifications. The evidence mounted as they watched. Surveillance photos caught Andrea passing packages during school events, Matthew conducting rushed inspections of known illegal substance houses. Bank records revealed money flowing through charities into offshore accounts. One more thing, Tom called out, reviewing maintenance logs. These equipment checks Matthew signed off on? All fake. He's been certifying safety gear that's never been inspected. Probably pocketing the maintenance budget too. James stared at the wall of evidence, photos, documents, surveillance footage, financial records. Andrea and Matthew had woven a complex web of deception, using his reputation and position as cover for their operation. Send the maintenance logs directly to Chief Harrison, he ordered. Our brothers deserve to know who they've been trusting their lives to. The pieces formed a perfect trap. James studied the evidence before him, knowing that soon, very soon, All their carefully constructed lies would come crashing down. They'd played him for a fool, used his home, endangered his fellow firefighters, and corrupted a school system meant to protect children. Now they would learn the true cost of their betrayal. The time for gathering evidence was ending. Soon would come the reckoning, and James intended to ensure that not a single lie would survive the inferno of truth about to engulf them all. Roosevelt High's auditorium was packed for the monthly board meeting. The room hummed with parents' chatter, teachers lounging in their usual cliques. Andrea sat prominently in the front row, surrounded by her sympathetic supporters. Her hand rested protectively over her stomach as she whispered to Susan Parker, another English teacher who'd helped organize fundraisers for her supposed fertility treatments. Chief Harrison slipped quietly into the back row, followed by several senior firefighters who positioned themselves strategically around the room. Matthew lounged near the emergency exit, his uniform immaculate, badge gleaming under the fluorescent lights. He winked at Andrea, their shared confidence still unshaken. Board President Richard Chen, a stern-faced former prosecutor, called the meeting to order at exactly 7 p.m. Before we address our regular agenda items, Captain James Mitchell has requested time to discuss concerns about our fundraising programs. Andrea's head snapped up, her practiced smile faltering as James approached the podium. He carried a simple leather briefcase, his movements measured and deliberate. Two men in dark suits entered through the side door, FBI agents, though nobody knew that yet. "Thank you, President Chen." James's voice filled the room without effort, years of command presence evident in every word. "I'm here to discuss the truth about what's really been happening with our school's charitable initiatives." The projector screen flickered to life behind him. This spreadsheet represents every fundraiser organized in the past 3 years. Green numbers show reported totals. Red numbers show actual deposits. Gasps rippled through the audience as six-figure discrepancies became apparent. $217,000, James continued, clicking through detailed financial records. That's how much disappeared into private accounts controlled by Andrea Mitchell and Matthew Reynolds. These accusations are outrageous. Andrea shot to her feet, playing to her audience. "I've dedicated my life to these kids while you played hero at the firehouse. Everyone here know." "Sit down, Mrs. Mitchell." President Chen's voice cracked like a whip. "Captain Mitchell has the floor. And I believe the FBI agents would prefer you remain seated." James clicked to the next slide's surveillance photos, showing Andrea's clandestine meetings behind the gym. Students walked past in the background, unwitting extras in her illegal substance operation. While parents believed they were supporting education, their children were being exposed to illegal substance trafficking. The room erupted. Susan Parker recoiled from Andrea as if burned. Matthew pushed off the wall, starting forward, but Chief Harrison's quiet command froze him mid-step. "Stay put, Reynolds." "That's an order." "The evidence has been independently verified," James continued over the chaos. Forensic accountants traced every dollar. Every transaction documented, every meeting recorded. He turned to address Andrea directly. "Would you like to explain to these parents how their donations funded your affair and illegal substance operation? Or should I detail how you use school events as distribution points?" Andrea's mask cracked. "You're lying. Matthew, do something." "About what exactly?" James's voice could have frozen fire. "The illegal substance operation you built in my basement? The falsified inspection reports covering your distribution network? Or maybe your creative storytelling about my fertility?" The school nurse stood up, fury twisting her normally kind face. "We raised over $20,000 for your fertility treatments. You said your husband refused to help." "A convenient lie," James cut in. "Like the non-existent Dr. Richardson she claimed to consult. My actual medical records show a temporary condition that resolved 2 years ago. Records I never signed, by the way. Those signatures were forged." Matthew finally spoke, his voice dripping familiar contempt. "You can't prove any of this. It's your word against ours, brother. And who's going to believe?" "I believe him." Claire's voice rang clear as she entered through the side door, case files in hand. A collective gasp went through the room at her still visible bruises. "I have proof of everything. The abuse, the previous affairs, the stolen funds from his last apartment in Colorado." Matthew's face contorted with rage. You stupid bot. Choose your next words very carefully, Chief Harrison warned, standing. His next words fell like hammer blows. The department's Internal Affairs Unit is particularly interested in those falsified inspection reports, especially the ones covering buildings linked to known illegal substance dealers. The room had gone deathly quiet. Andrea's former supporters were physically edging away from her. Matthew's fellow firefighters stared at him with naked disgust. James opened his briefcase methodically. I'm providing the board with complete documentation, bank records, surveillance logs, witness statements, evidence of systematic theft from multiple charitable organizations. He turned to face the accused. You used my reputation as a shield. Used this school as cover. Children for profit and personal gain. His smile was terrifying in its calmness. Now you can explain it all to the federal agents and to the DEA task force waiting outside. This is ridiculous. Andrea tried one last time. I'm pregnant. You can't. About that, one of the FBI agents stepped forward. We have some interesting lab results to discuss. The federal courthouse buzzed with tension as Andrea Mitchell faced sentencing. Her designer wardrobe had been replaced by prison orange, her carefully styled hair now limp and dull. Her attorney, a public defender since her assets were frozen, shuffled papers nervously. Federal prosecutor Sarah Martinez arranged her exhibits with practiced precision. The state calls Dr. Michael Chun, chief of obstetrics at Metro General. The distinguished physician took the stand, consulting his records. Mrs. Mitchell's pregnancy test results are conclusive. Conception occurred approximately 8 weeks ago, not during the claimed 5-year affair. Andrea's lawyer rose halfway. Objection. Relevance? Goes to pattern of deception, Your Honor. Martinez replied smoothly. The defendant used this pregnancy to manipulate sympathy, just as she used falsified medical claims to solicit fraudulent donations. Overruled. Judge Harriet Knowles had no patience for theatrics. She'd read the case files, seen the evidence of lives endangered for profit. From the gallery, James watched with Claire beside him. Matthew's separate trial would begin next week. His falsified inspection reports had triggered investigations across 3 states, revealing a pattern of compromised building safety stretching back years. Martinez methodically built her case. Bank statements showed systematic theft from multiple charities. Surveillance footage caught Andrea conducting substance transactions during school functions. Student witnesses confirmed study sessions that were cover for dealer meetings. The defendant didn't just steal money. Martinez addressed the jury. She stole trust. Trust from parents who believed their donations helped children. Trust from students who witnessed illegal substance deals disguised as tutoring. Trust from colleagues who raised thousands for fictional medical treatments. Andrea cracked under cross-examination. You don't understand. James was never there. Always playing hero while I suffer. Define suffering, Mrs. Mitchell. Martinez interrupted. Was it suffering to steal from children's fundraisers? Suffering to deal illegal substance on school grounds? Or was it suffering to lie about your husband's fertility to cover your affair? Matthew promised we'd be together. Andrea shrieked, her composure finally shattering completely. Once we had enough money. The courtroom doors opened. Federal marshals led in Matthew Reynolds, no longer in his proud uniform but prison coveralls. His eyes met Andrea's with cold calculation. The defendant Matthew Reynolds, his lawyer announced, wishes to cooperate with the prosecution in exchange for sentencing consideration. Andrea's wail of betrayal echoed through the courthouse. You promised. After everything we did. Mrs. Mitchell, Judge Knowles warned, control yourself or you'll be removed. It wasn't supposed to be like this. Andrea sobbed. The baby isn't mine, Matthew stated flatly. DNA test confirms it. Not mine, not James's. His smile was cruel. Seems you were busy with more than just our operation, weren't you? The final betrayal silenced even Andrea's sobs. Her web of lies collapsed completely, leaving nothing but cold justice. 1 year later, James stood in his converted basement, now a state-of-the-art training facility for the fire department. The grow operations infrastructure had been completely stripped out, the space reclaimed for legitimate use. Insurance had covered the renovation costs, turning a symbol of betrayal into one of redemption and brotherhood. Looking sharp, Cap, Tom commented, adjusting settings on new exercise equipment. Young firefighters worked out nearby, the space alive with purpose. Hard to believe what this place used to be. The department had emerged stronger from the scandal. Matthew's betrayal led to stricter oversight, renewed commitment to their oath. The Brotherhood learned that true loyalty meant accountability, not blind trust. Across town, Claire loaded the last boxes into her moving truck. Her nursing license would transfer easily to Seattle's Swedish Medical Center. The divorce settlement had given her everything. The judge cited Matthew's documented abuse and theft as justification. You didn't have to help with the move, she told James as he carried another box. Yes, I did. His response was simple but firm. You helped bring them down. Showed real courage. Sometimes courage is just being too tired to be afraid anymore. She managed a small smile. Heard about Andrea's appeal? Denied. Full sentence stands 15 years for illegal substance distribution near a school. James secured the box in the truck. Matthew's facing 20+ for the falsified inspections. Endangering firefighters and civilians doesn't play well with the parole board. The baby's paternity had become public record, one final twist that stripped away any remaining sympathy. Neither a loved child nor a symbol of their affair, just another lie in their tapestry of deception. James's office at the station held one reminder of the ordeal, his framed firefighter's oath. Loyalty, it began, not just to the job but to truth itself. The word held deeper meaning now, defined by courage to face hard truths rather than comfortable lies. The betrayal had cost him a marriage, tested his faith and friendship, but it hadn't broken him. Instead, it revealed strength he hadn't known. He possessed the ability to stand alone for truth, regardless of personal cost. Captain, a young firefighter appeared in his doorway. Got a call. Warehouse fire downtown. James grabbed his gear with practiced efficiency. Life continued. Emergencies still needed handling. People still needed saving. The past was sealed in court records and prison sentences, but the future belonged to those strong enough to face truth without flinching. He paused at his office door, glancing at one last photo from the evidence files. Andrea and Matthew being led away in handcuffs, their web of lies finally exposed to daylight. Sometimes, he reflected, the best revenge isn't elaborately planned. Sometimes it's as simple as letting truth have its day in court, watching as deception crumbles under its own weight. The station alarm blared. James headed for his truck, leaving the past behind. He had lives to save, a duty to fulfill, and a brotherhood that now understood the true meaning of loyalty. In the end, justice hadn't just been served, it had been earned, one piece of evidence at a time. Epilogue. 10 years later, the high-security women's correctional facility in Dublin, California looked especially stark under the morning sun. Andrea Mitchell, now inmate 47291, shuffled through her daily routine in the prison laundry. Her once perfectly manicured hands were rough from industrial detergents, her carefully maintained appearance long since surrendered to institutional monotony. Mitchell, visitor. The guard's voice echoed through the facility. Andrea's heart leaped, then immediately sank. After 10 years, she still hoped, but it was never who she wanted it to be. Her parents had disowned her after the scandal. Her former colleagues never responded to her letters. Matthew hadn't contacted her since his testimony destroyed what remained of her life. The visitor's room held a familiar face, Susan Parker, her former teaching colleague. The years hadn't been kind to their relationship. The board wanted me to inform you personally, Susan began without preamble. Your teaching license has been permanently revoked. The appeal was denied. Andrea's shoulders slumped. She'd clung to hope of returning to teaching after her release in 5 years. Susan, please. We were friends. Susan's laugh was bitter. I helped raise money for your fake fertility treatments. My students' children I was responsible for were exposed to your substance operation. Do you know Tommy Martinez overdosed last year? His first exposure to a legal substance was during your tutoring sessions. Andrea's carefully maintained prison composure cracked. I never sold directly to students. That wasn't part of. Save it. Susan stood. The board's decision is final. And Andrea? Those recommendation letters you asked for? None of us will write them. None of us will help you teach anywhere, ever again. After Susan left, Andrea sat alone, reality crushing down. 20 years into her sentence, increased after multiple failed appeals, with no possibility of returning to her career. Her pregnancy had ended in miscarriage during her first year in prison. Stress and guilt, the doctors said. The father, it turned out, was a dealer from their distribution network, adding one final humiliation to her disgrace. Across the country, in a maximum security federal prison in Colorado, Matthew Reynolds faced his own daily hell. His cooperation with prosecutors had earned him a slightly reduced sentence, but his crimes against fellow firefighters had made him a marked man among inmates. Former first responders in prison were rare and rarely forgiven by the general population. Reynolds. A guard banged his baton against the bars. "Your lawyer's here." The attorney looked uncomfortable in the prison meeting room. "It's about your latest appeal." The fire chief testified again. Between the falsified inspection reports and the equipment maintenance fraud, they're maintaining the enhanced sentencing. "You're not getting out early." Matthew's prison-aged face showed no surprise. His testimony against Andrea had earned him 5 years off his sentence, but he still faced another decade inside. His attempt to claim mental duress from Claire's emotional abuse had backfired spectacularly when she produced years of documented evidence to the contrary. "What about my pension?" His voice carried none of its former arrogance. "Forfeit." The department's decision was upheld. "Given the lives endangered by your actions." The lawyer shuffled papers. "The civil suits are also proceeding. Once you're released, any income you earn will be garnished for restitution." Matthew returned to his cell, where a photographed newspaper clipping mocked him from the wall. It showed James Mitchell receiving a commendation for reforming the department's inspection protocols. The Mitchell regulations were now standard across multiple states, ensuring no other corrupt inspector could endanger lives for profit. Meanwhile, in Seattle, Claire Reynolds, now Claire Bennett, reviewed patient charts in Swedish Medical Center's trauma unit. Her nursing career had flourished after leaving Matthew's shadow. She'd earned her nurse practitioner license, specializing in domestic violence cases. Dr. Bennett? Her new name and title still brought a smile. "Your 3 o'clock domestic violence support group is ready." She turned her experience into purpose, helping other women escape abusive relationships. Her testimony at Matthew's trial had inspired a department-wide review of domestic violence responses among first responders, leading to stronger support systems and accountability measures. The ring of her phone interrupted her thoughts. The display showed James Mitchell's name. "Claire, remember that training program you proposed? The one teaching emergency personnel to recognize domestic violence among their colleagues? The National Board approved it. They want you to head the implementation." She smiled, remembering how far she'd come from the frightened woman in that emergency room. "I'll need a good fire captain to help with the first responder aspects." "Already volunteered," James replied. "Tom's handling the station while I help with training." Back in California, James Mitchell's fire station had become a model for departmental integrity. The training facility in his converted basement hosted regular sessions on ethics and accountability. The framed oath on his wall had gained companions' commendations for his role in reforming department policies, awards for the peer support program he'd established. "Captain," Tom's voice carried excitement. "They've approved the expansion. 3 more departments adopting the Mitchell regulations next month." James nodded, reviewing the proposal. His experience had sparked a national conversation about oversight in emergency services. The protocols he developed after Matthew's betrayal were becoming standard practice across the country. His phone buzzed a message from Detective Sarah Martinez, now heading the department's expanded Internal Affairs Division. Final report on the Roosevelt High reconstruction. All traces of their operation gone. New administrations doing great work. The school had recovered from Andrea's betrayal, though the scars remained. Her former students, now adults, still dealt with the impact of her actions. The betrayed trust, the shattered innocence, consequences that extended far beyond her prison sentence. James's new wife, Dr. Rachel Chin, Sarah's sister from forensic accounting, understood his dedication to reform. They'd met during the investigation, bonding over shared values of integrity and justice. Their twin daughters, now 5, were growing up understanding that true strength came from standing for truth. The Mitchell Integrity Foundation called, Rachel mentioned over dinner. They want you to keynote their law enforcement conference. Theme is trust and accountability in public service. James considered the invitation. The foundation, funded partly by recovered illegal substance money from Andrea and Matthew's operation, supported programs preventing corruption in public service. Their work had helped implement many of the reforms sparked by the case. Late that night, James stood in his basement gym, now a testament to redemption. Young firefighters trained here, learning not just physical skills but ethical principles. The truth about Andrea and Matthew's operation had nearly destroyed the department's reputation, but the reforms that followed made it stronger. A news alert caught his attention. Andrea's latest appeal denied. Matthew's restitution payments increased. Their betrayal had failed to break him, instead catalyzing changes that would prevent others from following their path. Claire's domestic violence programs were saving lives. The Mitchell regulations were protecting communities. Even the pain Andrea and Matthew caused had been transformed into positive change. Sometimes justice isn't just about punishment, James reflected. Sometimes it's about turning betrayal into betterment, using hard truths to forge stronger systems. The station alarm sounded another emergency, another chance to serve. As James headed for his truck, he passed the wall of photos in the station house. Images of his crew, his family, his reform department, and in the center, the firefighter's oath that had started it all. Loyalty. It still began. But now everyone understood loyalty not to individuals, but to truth and justice themselves. Behind bars, Andrea and Matthew lived with their choices, watching from prison as their victims transformed tragedy into triumph. Their betrayal had failed to destroy James Mitchell. Instead, it had revealed his true strength, not just surviving their deception, but using it to protect others from similar harm. In the end, their greatest punishment wasn't the prison sentences or lost careers. It was watching from the shadows as their victims built something better from the ashes of their betrayal. That, James knew, was justice's final victory. Not just punishment, but transformation. Not just consequences, but change. The night shift stretched ahead, full of possibilities. Tomorrow would bring more training, more reforms, more lives touched by the lessons learned from one detective's determination to face truth without flinching. And somewhere in their cells, Andrea and Matthew faced their own reflections, understanding too late that their betrayal had forged not a victim, but a catalyst for change that would outlast their bitterness. Sometimes the best revenge isn't just letting truth have its day in court. Sometimes it's using that truth to build something stronger than the lies that came before.
This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comment section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy the story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.
I returned home to my cheating wife and a man in our bed, took revenge, and started a new life. Sitting in the New York airport, Max thought it was not the most enjoyable way to spend an evening. He observed the boarding process for what he hoped would be his flight back home to Charlotte. Max, along with his two sisters, owned a small pharmaceutical company their father had established decades earlier. His father had developed a series of valuable yet rarely used pills that kept the company profitable but offered limited growth. With his parents gone, Max had spent the past few days in New York negotiating the company's sale to a major pharmaceutical firm. Today, Max and his team of lawyers and brokers finalized the deal, leaving the paperwork to the attorneys. Max hoped to make it home tonight, but it seemed unlikely. The last flight to Charlotte for the day was fully booked, and he was third on the standby list. He refrained from calling his wife, Camila, unsure of what to tell her. He sat at the bar, keeping an eye on the gate, sipping his second gin and tonic, contemplating the deal and the substantial sum, over $10 million, that he and his sisters would share. This windfall, along with a well-compensated transition period with Big Pharma, promised a new lifestyle for him and Camila. Their twin daughters were already away at college, juniors at Duke, where tuition costs were draining his finances, but all that would change once the pharmaceutical deal was finalized. Meanwhile, the boarding process concluded, and gate agents began ushering the last passengers onto the plane. Then, a stroke of luck. The status on the boarding sign changed, and Max noticed his name move up the standby list. He threw some cash on the bar, gave a thumbs up to the bartender, grabbed his briefcase and duffel bag, and dashed for the exit. At the gate, an agent handed him his boarding pass and quickly explained, A group of 4 who checked in remotely didn't show up, so you and 2 others are getting their seats. Max hurried down the jet bridge with his newfound companions, and upon reaching his seat, realized it was in first class. A good omen, he thought. I made the flight. I'm heading home a day early, in first class. Maybe this means the pharmaceutical deal will indeed go through. As the boarding door closed and the plane taxied, he felt he deserved another drink. He had another gin and tonic and then dozed off, dreaming of a future where he and Camila could always fly first class. The jolt of landing woke him. Eventually, he reached the taxi stand for the ride home. A few days earlier, he had driven his pickup truck to the airport, but now, exhausted and a little tipsy, it was too late to call Camila to pick him up. They lived a few miles outside Charlotte, so the cab ride gave him enough time to nod off again. The driver had to wake him when they arrived. Max paid the fare generously, got out of the taxi a bit groggy, and as he turned toward the house, what he saw stopped him in his tracks and fully woke him up. A gold Mercedes parked in front of his side of the garage. It looked like a very stylish Mercedes, but then again, all Mercedes seemed stylish to him. The house had fallen into darkness. It was well past midnight, and Max stood motionless for several minutes. He had spoken to Camila from his lawyer's office around noon, and she hadn't mentioned anything about unexpected visitors so late. Trying to push away unthinkable thoughts, he envisioned a happy scenario where he could soon curl up with a warm, sleepy Camila, but his mind wouldn't cooperate. Slowly, he made his way through the passage between the garage and the house, unlocked the door, and entered the silent home. With deliberate steps, he moved through the kitchen and up the stairs to their bedroom, where the door stood ajar. Seemingly unprepared for guests, Max stepped inside. Then it closed. There was no other way to describe it. His mind went blank, his breathing halted, even his heart seemed to stop beating. He witnessed what he could only imagine as unthinkable. Camila lay undressed, sprawled on her side of the bed, one arm wrapped around another man who slept beside her, a faint smile on his lips. Max stood there for what felt like an eternity. Eventually, his mind started to function again. He glanced at Camila's hand resting on the man, and they both snored softly. This shattered Max's heart. Until tonight, he had found solace in listening to Camila snore, a comforting sound that meant she felt secure in the peaceful sleep they shared. He often fell asleep to that gentle purr, but now that was all gone. He would never hear that snore again, never share a bed with her. Despite his broken heart, Max began to think rationally. He noticed the man's neatly folded clothes on a chair where Max had sat countless times. Anger simmered inside him. He pulled on his pants, retrieved his wallet and car keys, and paused to consider his next move. Thoughts of grabbing a tennis racket from the bedroom closet and confronting the man crossed his mind. He even contemplated confronting Camila. Both impulses promised immediate satisfaction but threatened severe consequences. Another idea took shape in his mind. He pulled out his cell phone and started taking incriminating photos. As the plan developed, Max finished documenting the scene and gathered the man's clothes and shoes. The man was much larger than Max, taller and heavier. A tennis racket wouldn't be wise, even in the short term. With the clothes in hand, Max stole one last glance at his wife, his once beloved partner and mother of their daughters, and steeled himself against the love that had sustained him for over 2 decades. He left the bedroom dry-eyed and descended the stairs to the outside. The car's key fob beeped, and the doors of the Mercedes opened. Max stowed his briefcase and duffel bag inside before settling into the driver's seat. He had never been one for fancy cars, but as he maneuvered the Mercedes, he found himself appreciating it. After driving a mile, Max pulled over and examined the man's wallet. It contained the usual items: cash, business cards identifying him as Franklin Thompson, a senior sales manager at a local Mercedes dealership, and a driver's license with a Charlotte address. If the man had a family, Max realized he could cause significant trouble for him, and perhaps for Camila too. But for now, exhausted, Max decided to head to the nearest motel to get some rest. Camila, truly a highly cautious person, aware of her husband Max's greater intelligence. She managed to sustain an affair with Franklin Thompson for nearly 5 months without Max suspecting a thing. Max is still in New York, she thought the next morning while lying in bed with Franklin. He satisfied her physically, though not quite as well as Max. Too much like a car salesman, she mused, deciding it was time to end the affair. Franklin's growing possessiveness, including his desire to spend the night, had crossed a line. Despite Max's likely ignorance of the situation, having another man in their marital bed felt too disrespectful. She planned to call Franklin later that day and firmly but kindly end things. Then, she headed for the shower. As she dressed back in the bedroom, Franklin emerged from the shower wrapped in a towel. He paused, then asked, Camila, where did my clothes go? What? I didn't move anything, she replied. Where are you going tonight? I left them folded on this chair. They're gone. Did you take them to the guest room? She began, but he hurried down the hall and returned empty-handed. No, they're not there. They're nowhere. Camila impatiently suggested. Maybe you left them downstairs last night after we came in? No, I'm sure I didn't, but I'll go check, Franklin said, leaving the room and quickly returning. Camila, my car's gone too. Someone was here, took my clothes and stole my car. Damn it, what's happening? Camila struggled to grasp the situation. How could his clothes and car vanish when they'd been home all night? Could someone have broken in? She sank onto the bed, and Franklin asked, What's wrong? Camila tried to speak, her breath catching. Franklin, what if it was Max? She finally managed. What if he came back from New York while we were asleep and took your things in your car? Damn, Franklin muttered, collapsing beside her. We need to find out where he is. It could be him, but if he's still in New York, then it's a break-in. We have to call the police. I need my stuff and my car back. Oh damn, this car, if we involve the police, they'll ask whose car it is, and it's in my wife's name for some tax reason. His voice trailed off, imagining the potential fallout from bad to catastrophic. I'll call his office. His secretary gets in very early, so she should know where he is. Camila pulled out her phone and dialed Max's office number. Despite the early hour, Max's secretary answered promptly. Max Chork office, how can I assist you? Hey Sheila, it's Camila. I know it's early and I'm not sure where Max is. He didn't call last night. Have you heard from him?
Hi, Camila. It's still early here.
The team in New York worked late yesterday, so they'll probably start late today. I spoke with Max around 6 yesterday evening before I left. He mentioned they were making good progress and might finalize a deal today. He said that? That's good to hear, so he's still in New York, right? She asked. Yes, I'm certain he is. I expect to hear from him once they're back at the lawyer's office. Should I have him call you? He responded. Yes, please, but only if he has a moment. I know how crucial this deal is, she replied. Understood, bye, he said, and they hung up. Camila turned to Franklin. Max is still in New York, so we should call emergency and report a break-in and car theft, she told him. Camila, what do we tell them? That your lover had his clothes stolen from your bedroom and his car stolen from your driveway? What the hell, this is a disaster, Franklin exclaimed. Okay, I get it. Let's think this through. How about I drop you off at home and you report the thefts as happening there while your wife was taking the kids to school? Maybe skip the stolen clothes. Those would be harder to explain than a missing car, she suggested. Yeah, except yesterday I told my wife I was going to Atlanta for a meeting on the new Mercedes S-Class and wouldn't be home until noon, he said. Okay, we can wait until noon. When you're back, you drove home, left your keys in the car for a quick stop before going to the dealership, and your car was stolen while you were inside, she proposed. You know, I think that could work. I could also say my wallet was in the car and got stolen. We can hang out here for a few hours, maybe take another shower together, Franklin said with a suggestive tone. Franklin, she responded, her tone serious. Okay, yeah, I need to call work to take a sick day, he said, realizing the gravity of the situation. Camila, who worked as a paralegal in a small law firm, found the job somewhat dull. She stepped into the hallway to make a call, and when she returned, she found Franklin back in bed. Tempted, she thought of Max and her recent decision to end the affair, ultimately deciding to decline. Franklin, she said, making no move to undress. I think it's time to end this. We've had our fun, but last night it could have been Max. We're fortunate it was just a burglar. Let's find some clothes and maybe grab breakfast somewhere. Franklin looked at her briefly, considered arguing, but ultimately realized she was right. They had been lucky, but shouldn't push their luck. Yes, he agreed, inwardly recalling, with a slight smile, another attractive middle-aged mother who often visited the car dealership. Okay, I agree. It's been good. So how about some clothes? He said. It proved more challenging than expected. Franklin was 50 lbs heavier and 4 inches taller than Max. Eventually, Camila managed to find a pair of worn-out sweatpants that fit Franklin somewhat, fashioning makeshift adjustments with strings to hold them up. She also unearthed a faded sweatshirt, now tinged pink from a sloppy wash, which she further modified with trimmed sleeves and widened armholes. Despite wanting to make a remark about the outfit resembling clown attire, she only smiled faintly at Franklin's expression. They decided to pass the time watching TV until it was time to head to Franklin's house. Earlier that morning, around the time Franklin discovered his missing clothes and car, Max arrived at the address listed on Franklin's driver's license. It was a pleasant house with a small bicycle leaning against the garage wall. Max sat in his car, contemplating, wondering, still devoid of tears. His night at the motel had passed swiftly, and he hadn't gone for a run until dawn. Surprisingly, he didn't feel worse. Perhaps he was still in shock. He approached the front door, holding Franklin's wallet with the driver's license visible. He rang the bell, and a young woman in her 20s, attractive yet somewhat disheveled, answered. Max wore a suit purchased the previous day in New York, now rumpled, a white shirt, and no tie. Despite not looking his best, he hoped not to appear threatening. He held up Franklin's driver's license for her to see and gestured towards the gold Mercedes. Before he could speak, the woman slammed the door shut, then reopened it moments later with her cell phone in hand. I have emergency ready to dial. Tell me my husband is okay. Ma'am, I have a photo on my phone of your husband and my wife in bed last night, both undressed and fast asleep. Honestly, I don't think there's anything wrong with your husband or mine. If you want to call emergency, go ahead. I'll wait in the car. They stared at each other until her expression softened, and she opened the door, beginning to say something when a voice from the kitchen interrupted with, "Mommy, wait here, I'll be right back," she said, turning towards what Max presumed was the kitchen. He heard voices, hers and at least one child's, before she returned with a cup of coffee for him. "I hope you take it black. I need to get the kids ready for school and drop them off. Honestly, I trust you more than my husband right now. You can wait here until I get back and then we can talk." "Sure, okay," Max replied. Seems we're both in a similar situation. He settled into the living room and soon the woman reappeared with 2 children, introducing him as Dad's friend before leaving with them. Max sat quietly, sipping on the mediocre coffee, contemplating calling his office, but ultimately remaining seated. When she returned, she hurried upstairs briefly and returned looking more composed, her hair brushed and lips lightly tinted. She extended her hand to Max. "Sorry for the chaos earlier. I'm Molly Thompson, currently married to Franklin Thompson, who happens to be involved with your wife." Max couldn't help but chuckle at her phrasing, a brief moment of relief. "You've summed up the situation perfectly. I'm Max Chork and my wife's name is Camila Chork. Let me explain what happened last night." As Max recounted the events, Molly began to cry. "I'm filing for divorce from Camila, and these photos will certainly help with the settlement. I can send them to your phone if you think you might need them." "Yes, please keep them," Molly replied, her eyes dull. Max started to reach for his phone but paused as Molly continued. "Hold on. I don't want those images burned into my memory forever. You keep them, and if I ever need them, I'll call you." "Okay, of course," Max agreed, adding, "I probably won't be staying at my current job or home for much longer. Here's my lawyer's contact information. Feel free to reach out if you need the photos or any assistance with divorce proceedings." "Thank you," Molly said. "But what should we do now? Are you returning the car, waiting for Franklin to confront him? He's a big guy, despite putting on some weight. Supposedly, he was in Atlanta for a car meeting overnight and should be back this afternoon. You know, I'm rather fond of this car, and I've never driven a Mercedes before. I think I'll keep it until someone insists otherwise. As for your husband, let's just call him Idiot for now." She chuckled, and Max joined in, both needing the release. "Actually, the car is registered in my name," Molly disclosed. "For tax reasons, more depreciation, I think. Franklin, or should I say Idiot, put it in my name since I use it more." She paused thoughtfully before continuing. "Since it's my car, I can give you permission to drive it, and if you get stopped, the police can call me to verify." Max appreciated the plan but held back, sensing Molly was still refining it. "And one more thing," she added. "There have been a lot of burglaries in our neighborhood lately. You have Franklin's keys and clothes. If the spare key we hid in the backyard is missing when he arrives, he might attempt to break in. And if our security system is set to instant alert mode, he'll attract some unwanted police attention. Molly, I think I'm falling for you all over again. You're amazing." Okay, let's stay calm. Franklin can wait until this afternoon when the kids and I get home from school. I'll pick them up and take them to the park for a while. Let's give him more time to get into even more trouble. Whatever happens, keep me updated, especially if he gets into trouble with the police, and call me when you need to return the car. I don't want you getting into any trouble. We're good now. You need to get going, so do I." Max drove off in a splendid gold Mercedes, pondering how much the same model in a better color might cost. Molly handed him the permission slip, and he assumed she would retrieve the hidden key, set the alarm, and be gone for the rest of the day. Meanwhile, Camila and Franklin arrived at his house around noon. She dropped him off hastily, as if avoiding an infection, and he approached his front door, hoping it might be unlocked because Molly was home, but also fearing her presence. It was, of course, locked. He hurried around to the backyard rock where they kept the spare key, only to find it missing. "Oh, crap," he muttered, scanning the back of the house, considering breaking in. He attempted the back door, but it, too, was locked. Left with little choice, he contemplated breaking a window along the rear wall, opting for the family room window due to its size. He broke off a branch from a tree for leverage. Barefoot, he needed a way to avoid the broken glass. Grabbing 2 chairs from the porch, he positioned them beneath the window, planning to climb over them carefully into the living room. Taking a few deep breaths, he prepared himself. Franklin tossed the branch through the family room window, which shattered satisfyingly, followed by the blaring of the home alarm system. A stroke of bad luck, compounded by a passing police car. Earlier that morning, Molly had alerted the police about potential break-ins in the neighborhood. Damn it! Damn it! Franklin cursed, scrambling over the chairs to enter the house and disabled the security system, but he wasn't quick enough. Police, stop right there and slowly step away from the house, hands up, an officer commanded. Franklin glanced back, seeing 2 officers with drawn pistols. He complied, managing to scrape his legs as he descended from the chairs and backed away. Officers, I can explain, he began, but one of them swiftly handcuffed him, ignoring his attempt to clarify. His rights were read aloud, and he was asked if he wanted to make a statement. Yes, this is my house, and I didn't have a key, so I broke in to get some clothes and call my office, Franklin explained. The officers eyed Franklin's tracksuit, perhaps thinking clown clothes, and one asked for identification. No, not on me right now. You see, I lost my car and all my clothes, so I just needed to get inside to find some real clothes, Franklin continued. How did you lose your car, sir? One officer asked. Well, I stayed at a friend's place last night, and this morning the car, wasn't there, Franklin stammered. It just disappeared, huh? Have you reported it missing? Maybe you left it somewhere, the officer pressed. Franklin hesitated. He didn't want to reveal his whereabouts, or why he hadn't reported the car missing, but going to jail for trying to enter his own home was also not appealing, especially with the uncomfortable handcuffs. Then, an idea struck him. You could call my wife. She can confirm who I am, and maybe you could take me to my office. Someone there can help me get some clothes. Knowing dealing with dealership drama was preferable to jail, Franklin gave Molly's phone number to one of the officers who called her. Franklin could hear part of the conversation. Ma'am, this is Officer Ree from the Charlotte Police Department. We're at the address he provided, the location. We have a man here claiming to be your husband. He attempted to break into your house because he lost his clothes, and yes ma'am, no ma'am. Yes ma'am, we will, of course, do that. Thank you ma'am, the officer said, turning back to Franklin. The officer said the lady says her husband is in Atlanta and anyone breaking into her house must be a burglar. She hopes we throw you in jail and toss away the key. But, Franklin was nearly in tears as the officers escorted him to their patrol car to take him to the station. Meanwhile, Camila arrived at her office half a day later, but determined to catch up, with thoughts of Max still on her mind. She tried calling his cell phone but received no answer. She then dialed his office number again. Hello, Sheila, it's Camila again. I'm starting to get a little worried about Max since I still haven't heard anything from him. Have you heard anything? Camila asked. No updates yet. He's likely still in New York with the lawyers, but it's unusual for him not to call. Since you're concerned, I'll check on him and get back to you shortly, Sheila replied. All right, thank you, Sheila. You're the best secretary ever, Camila said. A few minutes later, Camila received a call back. Camila, it's Sheila. I spoke with a secretary at the law office. Max left late yesterday, hoping to catch the last flight to Charlotte. I called him, and he asked me to let you know he'll call you later, Sheila informed her. Okay, thanks, Sheila, thanks, Camila said, a pit forming in her stomach. Meanwhile, Max drove a gold Mercedes to a divorce lawyer recommended by Fred Thomas, his longtime business lawyer. Trusting Fred's referral, he hoped for the best. Mr. Chork, please have a seat. Miss Reinhardt will be with you shortly, the secretary informed him. Max settled in, finding some comfort in the lawyer's office, neither extravagant nor cheap. Before worry could set in, a middle-aged woman with dyed red hair entered. Mr. Chork? Max nodded as she introduced herself. I'm Anna Reinhardt. Fred spoke highly of you, so let's discuss your situation in my office, she said. They moved to her office where Max accepted coffee from the secretary and began his story, discovering his wife's infidelity, seeking a divorce, and protecting his assets, notably from his and his sister's company sale. He omitted the Mercedes incident, unsure how Anna would react. Max, may I call you that? Anna asked. Max agreed and she continued. Here's some relatively good news. Given your circumstances, Fred mentioned your ownership of the company before marriage, making those shares separate property. Your wife has no claim on them or their proceeds. Keep them separate from any joint accounts. Understand? I believe so, Max replied. What about our home? Retirement accounts and such? Well, it's less favorable there, Anna explained. Given your higher income, expect child support for several years. We might mitigate contributions to retirement by adjusting alimony. It's not ideal, but it avoids future issues, especially splitting retirement funds. Your kids are college-bound, so no child support there. You okay with covering their college expenses? Yes, that works, Max confirmed. What about the house? You and your wife need to decide. You can sell it and split the proceeds, or one of you can buy out the other based on its current appraised value, Anna responded. After what I witnessed last night, I definitely don't want this house anymore. I doubt Camila can afford to buy my share, so selling it seems like the best option, Max decided. All right, I'll prepare the necessary paperwork accordingly. The divorce petition is fairly standard, so I can have it ready for you early tomorrow if you'd like. We can serve it to her tomorrow afternoon and propose a settlement next week, Anna said. Wow, that's pretty quick. Max started. Max, listen to me. If there's any chance for reconciliation, perhaps counseling or sometime, Anna suggested. No, it's just a shock right now. Less than 24 hours ago, I was happy, eager to share news of the company sale with my wife. Now, I'm here discussing divorce, but we have to move forward. I'll figure out how to handle this. Okay, Max said, trying to steady himself. If you change your mind, just give me a call and we can reassess, Anna offered. Max thanked her, settled the fee, and left the office. Walking back to the gold Mercedes, he wondered about the events with the man he saw last night. It reminded him he promised his secretary to call Camila. Camila answered in her law firm office. Camila, it's Max. You called and were looking for me, Max said. Oh, Max, thanks for calling. I missed you. Where are you? Camila asked. I'm here in Charlotte, Max replied. Max, when did you get back? The pit in her stomach twisted. Last night, Camila, I got back last night, Max said. The pit grew heavier. Camila leaned back, struggling to breathe, let alone speak. Max, I think I should hang up, she said. No, Camila, please, Max said. Can we meet somewhere? I need to see you just for a few minutes. Max hesitated. This woman was his love, the mother of his daughters, the most significant person in his life for over 20 years. Okay, Camila, Center Cafe at 6. The pain intensified. Camila reluctantly agreed. The Center Cafe held sentimental value. They had first met there with friends long ago. Over time, it became their special place. Now, she felt anxious. Max had suggested it and she had to agree. Max, I'll be there, and please understand I'm sorry and I love you, Camila said, her voice breaking. Max hung up. Camila sat, tears streaming, the pain deepening. Camila arrived early at the cafe. Max hadn't arrived yet. She ordered a glass of wine and reflected on her self-perception. Her initial experiences were with robust football players in college. Although she had flirted in high school, it was the football players who had made her feel vulnerable, holding her down. When Max came into her life, she thought she had overcome those feelings. He was everything she needed, strong, loving, a great father, a good provider. That should have been enough, but on the flight back from the West Coast, everything changed. Max was on a business trip, pitching a new pill to a pharmaceutical company, and she had accompanied him for the weekend. Flying back alone on an overnight flight, she sat next to a burly man, the coach of a local NFL team. They chatted, drank too much, and she fell asleep with her head on his shoulder. She woke to find his hand between her legs, under her skirt. Now, reflecting on that night, she knew she should have screamed or pushed his hand away, but she didn't, and the guilt, the absence of it, troubled her. She only felt relief when Max returned later that week, and she had recovered physically and emotionally. The coach left after one season, but not before introducing her to a player from the practice squad. He wasn't a star, but like the coach, he was dominating in bed. She felt grateful when he was transferred elsewhere. Eventually, guilt surfaced, and she ended the affair, wanting to remain faithful to Max. She thought she had put her infidelity behind her. By the time their daughters left for college, she cherished her renewed bond with Max during this period. Then Max surprised her with a generous gift, a new luxury car of her choice. Unfortunately, she chose to visit the Mercedes dealership where she met Franklin Thompson. He didn't just sell her a car, he seduced her. She knew it was wrong, compounded by the fact that Franklin wasn't even good in bed. Despite her previous indiscretions, she believed her marriage was strong. Now, she loved Max more than ever and wanted to be faithful. It was the right thing. Allowing Franklin into their marital bed was a mistake, even before Max found out. Now, she feared the consequences she might have to face. Hello, Camila. Max's voice pulled Camila's gaze up to see him standing there. He appeared visibly aged since his return from New York, a change she blamed herself for. The serpent in her gut continued to coil and bite. Hi, Max. Thank you for being here. I don't even know where to begin to express how sorry I am. Can I ask you a few questions, he asked, taking a seat. Oh, Max, please, no. If we have any chance, questions and answers will only destroy that chance. Max, we should run away for a few days to a Caribbean island where we can reconnect, hold each other. Camila, please, you're not seeing clearly. If you can't answer my questions, I'll leave now. The snake continued to torment her, but Camila knew she had to endure the pain and let Max express his anger however he needed. Perhaps, just perhaps, he could find a way through his rage to some form of reconciliation. Okay, Max, ask me anything. Do you know what time I got home last night? A peculiar question, she thought. No, not exactly. It had to be after. She trailed off, knowing his next question already. And do you know what I found when I got home? When I went upstairs to our bedroom, or should I say, what used to be our bedroom? Yes, Max, I know what you must have seen, and I know it must have been one of the worst things you've ever seen in your life. And I know it's entirely my fault that you saw this, and I'm begging you, please, listen to me. Max, I'm sorry, so sorry that. I won't fight the divorce you want if you want. Shut up, Camila. Next question. How many men have there been since we got married? If you lie, if I think you're lying, I'm leaving. Camila's first instinct was to lie, then she realized it was too risky. Finally, she concluded that the marriage was likely over anyway. 3, max. 3 men whom I now deeply regret ever meeting. I can see in your eyes that our marriage is over, and I understand. You deserve someone better than me. I'm willing to do almost anything to give us another chance, but I understand if you want nothing to do with me anymore. Call the lawyer, Camila. Tomorrow you will be served with divorce papers. Max stood up and left. Camila sat there, initially too stunned to cry. As she processed what Max had just said, the pain in her stomach intensified, and she began to cry. Max walked out of the cafe, reflecting on how he and Camila had first met there decades ago. He wondered if this would be their last lovemaking conversation. Closeness, he thought bitterly, had become a curse. Hearing her confess to having lovemaking with other men, and seeing her with Franklin in their bed, asleep, snoring for God's sake. How would he ever get over this? Maybe he could handle knowing about 3 faceless men over their 20-odd years together, with some counseling and a lot of groveling on her part, maybe. But he would never get over that scene in their bed. Their marriage was finished. Sitting in that damn gold Mercedes, he finally cried. As darkness fell, Max blew his nose, wiped his face, and remembered what Molly Thompson had said that morning, which now felt like a year ago. She had told him not to send her the pictures of him cheating, believing it would be harder to forgive with visual evidence. Max decided to call her, share this thought, and check on the situation with the Mercedes. Hello, Molly answered the call. Molly, it's Max Trork from this morning, just checking in to see how you're doing and what to do with the car. Max, thanks for calling. I'm managing. You can keep the car for now. Franklin is in so much trouble he won't need it for a while. Trouble? I hope you didn't shoot him. No, but he might have preferred that. He got arrested for trying to break into our house and took a swing at one of the cops. He's a big guy, and the cops shot him with a stun weapon. Then something happened while he was in jail. He doesn't want to talk about it, but I think he might have been attacked by another prisoner. I refused to speak to him, so he had to call his brother to post bail. Now his whole family knows what's going on. Wow, Molly, I can't say I feel sorry for him, but I do feel sorry for you. I wanted to tell you that you made the right decision this morning, not to look at the pictures of him cheating. If you have any chance of reconciliation, those photos would make it a lot harder. Yeah, he came home a couple of hours ago, crying, apologizing, and begging me to let him stay, at least for now. We have 2 little kids, so I'm going to try to work things out, but life won't be easy for him. His own brother, a lawyer, told me to push for a prenuptial agreement and offered to help. Plus, I'll be managing our finances for a while. Franklin will be on a short leash and I'll be tugging his collar often. Stay strong, Molly. I wish you all the best. When you need to return the car, just call me. They hung up, and Max sat there, feeling a bit envious of Molly. Maybe Franklin had learned his lesson. Being arrested and charged with assaulting a police officer, combined with his experience in jail, might have frightened him significantly. Max hoped so, for Molly's and their children's sake. Finally, he drove back to the motel where he was staying. He had one more task before trying to sleep, calling his daughters, Jane and Joan. Hi, Daddy, it seemed like Jane had answered. They were twins, not identical, but close enough. They sounded alike and attended the same expensive college, studying nursing. At least they didn't look exactly alike. Similar and clearly sisters, but not obviously twins. Max often admitted to himself that he was glad they weren't identical. They were already skilled at ganging up on him, and it would be even harder if 2 identical young women were persuading him to buy a car, stay out late, or give them money for a spring break trip to Florida. Daddy, please! but he also admitted, again only to himself, that he enjoyed spoiling them. Janie, yes, you guessed right. Of course there was a 50/50th chance. What's up? Listen, tomorrow is Saturday, and I'd like to invite you and your sister for breakfast. Well, let's call it brunch, maybe around 11 or so, at that bistro on 4th Street we used to go to. That works for me. Hold on a second. He heard some noise, and then she came back. And Joan is good with it too. Can we? He quickly interrupted her because at their last brunch, 6 or 7 of their friends had shown up. Let's make it just the 3 of us, okay? Of course, Jane replied. But tell me what? Again, he cut her off, not wanting to have a difficult conversation over the phone, which was challenging even in person. Listen, I have to go. See you at 11. Love you, and tell your sister I love her too. Bye. He hung up, hoping she wouldn't call Camila, but knowing he couldn't tell her that, otherwise she would have called Camila immediately. 11 tomorrow morning would come soon enough. After Max left the cafe, leaving Camila with his warning, or curse, to hire a lawyer, her tears were uncontrollable. She knew she had ruined everything, her marriage, her family, her entire life. She realized her daughters would find out, her parents would know, and all her friends would learn about it. She would likely lose Max, her home, and poor Max seeing her in their bed, undressed, probably with Franklin, who had a hardness, must have nearly eliminated him. Her tears continued to flow. Eventually, the waitress came over and asked if she needed to go to the ladies' room. Camila choked back her sobs and managed to say, "No, thank you." She paid the bill and left, heading back to the house that would soon no longer be hers. When she got there, she found some gin, just the wrong amount, not enough to make her pass out, but too much to help her figure out how to get Max back. After drinking it all, she fell asleep, hoping for a miracle that would bring Max back to her. Max was sitting in the bistro at 11 the next morning when his daughters walked in. He had reviewed and approved the draft divorce petition early that morning, then drove 2 hours from Charlotte, using the drive to figure out how to break the news to Jane and Joan. Initially, everything seemed normal. Hugs and kisses, how was school, how was work. They ordered and ate their food, had their plates cleared, and then finally, the real conversation began. "Dad, we know something is wrong," Joan started. "You look a bit unwell. Are you here to tell us you have cancer or something, and if so, where is Mom?" "Girls, I do have really bad news, but it's not physical. No one is dying. It's about Mom." Jane interrupted. "She did something terrible, didn't she? Oh my God, did she run off with one of her firm's lawyers? Some young, strong guy that Janie or I should be chasing?" Both girls burst out laughing, stunned by the absurdity, until they saw their father wasn't laughing. "Dad? No, not Mom." Joan couldn't voice her fear aloud. "Girls, listen carefully. Yes, Mom cheated. She cheated on me, but that doesn't mean she cheated on you." Joan, crying, said, "Dad, if her cheating is destroying our family, then yes, she cheated on us just as much as she cheated on you." Both girls cried, and then Max started crying too. They stood up, trying to hug their dad and each other at the same time. "Dad, let's get out of here," Jane suggested. "There's a park about 2 blocks from here, and we'll have more privacy there." People were starting to stare, so Max quickly paid the bill, and they walked to the park, a daughter on each side of him, all holding on to each other. "Tell us, Dad," Jane said after they found a bench to share. "We deserve to know how bad it is." "Yeah, right," Joan added. "We're mature enough to handle this." "On the way here, I was trying to figure out how to tell you," Max began. "I agree, you are both adults, and yes, your mother did cheat on all of us. I found her at home, in our bed, with another man, and she later admitted there had been others before him. I think I'm still in shock, but I know that she and I can't recover from this. I've already talked to a divorce lawyer, and Mom is getting a divorce petition today." They cried more and then fell silent, contemplating the news and their future. "Girls, no matter how bad it is, you need to prioritize yourselves and your schoolwork. There's enough money to cover your senior year at Duke, and if either of you wants to pursue graduate studies, I believe I can find funds for that too, but there's a condition." They looked at him, curious. "I'm willing to pay for your education, but I expect you to work hard and get good grades. Yes, what Mom did makes it hard to concentrate, but you told me you're adults, real adults, mature, disciplined people can handle such adversity, right?" They looked at each other, cried again, and hugged him. "Yes, Daddy, you are the best, and we won't let you down," Joan assured him, while Jane looked pensive. "Dad, Joan is right, we won't let you down, but what about you? Will you be okay? What are you going to do?" "Well, you can think about a lot during a 2-hour drive. First, I want you both to know that what you said doesn't surprise me at all. I know you'll continue to do well in school, and I will continue to be proud of you. As for me, what your mother did slapped me hard. I could crawl into a hole, suffer, feel sorry for myself, and try to reconcile with your mom, but I realize that doesn't suit me. I've spent my entire adult life taking care of others. When I started working for my grandparents' company, I took care of them. After they left, I took care of my sisters, as they owned their shares in the company. Then I took care of your mother, and I took care of you girls. It might sound like I'm complaining, but I'm not. The company will soon be sold, which will relieve me of responsibility for my sisters. Camila is gone, and you guys. I promise I'll be happy to help you start your adult lives. So what? 2 home runs out of 3 in terms of the women in my life. Not bad. That leaves me, and guess what? I see this whole situation, with betrayal and divorce, not as the worst thing, but as a chance to start a new life. A life dedicated to taking care of one person. Me. Fine, Dad, really? If you mean what you say, that's great, Joan said. Jane was more skeptical. Dad, what does all this really mean? New life? Working for another pharmaceutical company? Buying a farm? Good question. I do have an answer, no details yet, but this new life will be physical. I'm going to run marathons, climb mountains, swim across the Atlantic, climb the Alps, go on safari. I have a million things I'm going to do, and guess what? While doing these things, I might meet a nice woman doing the same activities. Who knows? Damn it, Dad, this is amazing. Both girls looked at him, astonished. This was their father, not some enterprising adventurer. Did you really come up with all this while driving here from Charlotte? Jane asked. Well, yes, partly. Besides, I didn't sleep much, and different ideas were spinning in my head. I mean, I could start drinking and feeling sorry for myself, but instead, I'm going to make the best of this mess. Trust me, I'll be fine. Max left his daughters with more hugs, kisses, and tears, then headed back to Charlotte in the gold Mercedes. As soon as Max left, the girls called their mother. Hello? A strained voice answered the phone at the Chork house. Joan put the call on speaker. Mom, this is Joan and Jane. We just had breakfast with Dad and he told us some terrible news. What'd he say? Well, he mentioned divorce and said it was because of your betrayal. Dad gave us some details, but that's the gist. Is this true? Oh, girls, this is complicated. He and I have been married for a long time, and is a mistake as I made a big mistake. Well, more than one, actually, but I'm sure we can get through it. I just need to give your father some time to— Mom, Joan interrupted. Listen, Dad said divorce. He didn't talk about fixing things. He talked about cheating. Well, yes, technically he's right, but that doesn't mean we can't fix it. I told him I would do anything. Mom, Jane interrupted, I think you're delusional. He told us that he had already met with a divorce lawyer. He said there's no turning back for you two. Joan and I don't want to take sides, but you have to face reality. They heard tormented breathing on the other end. Joan and Jane exchanged glances, wondering if they should have gone to Charlotte. Finally, Camila spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. I know. I screwed up and ruined my marriage. I think your father hates me, and he's right. I've done awful things. He told me to hire a lawyer, and he was right about that too. I'm sorry, girls. I know it's terrible for you too. Mom, don't worry about us, Joan said. We'll be fine, and I know Dad is doing everything he can. You need to take care of yourself. Hiring a lawyer is a good idea. Jane and I can come to Charlotte if you need us. Thank you, girls. That's kind of you. I'll be okay. I just need time to come to terms with what I've done. They hung up, still unsure of their next steps. You know, Joan said, it's funny, though it's not really funny. We're more worried about Mom, who caused all this mess, than about Dad. They continued talking and eventually decided not to go home, allowing their parents to deal with the situation without their interference. Camila sat in her home in Charlotte, a bit hungover from the gin she drank the night before, and feeling very depressed after talking to her daughters. She knew she had to get up, get dressed, and leave the house, do something, she thought. Just as she considered buying more gin, the doorbell rang. Camila opened the door to find a young woman standing there, chewing gum. Can I help you? Camila asked. Yes, ma'am. Are you Camila Chork, Max Chork's wife? Why, yes, that's me. Why do you ask? Ma'am, you have been served, the woman said, handing Camila a folder with documents and taking photographs. What? Camila asked, as the woman walked back to her car. Camila returned to the kitchen table to look at the mysterious folder. When she saw the title of the first document, she nearly fainted. It was a petition for divorce. She remembered Max's last words to her, "Get a lawyer." As she sat there staring at the familiar kitchen she had once enjoyed with Max, she knew the happy days wouldn't return after what she had done. Camila was right. She and Max never reconciled after her betrayal. 6 years later, sitting in the ballroom of an expensive hotel and watching Jane dance with her new husband, Camila mentally plunged into the past. When the girls were teenagers, life seemed terrible. Too many activities, too much teenage angst, and boys who were either too mean or, in Camila's view, too nice to the girls. Max was too busy with his job, and her work as a lawyer was too boring. Life had been overwhelming then, but now she missed it terribly. She was still at the same law firm, doing the same mundane paperwork. "Camila, here is your wine." Camila looked at her date, a perfectly sweet, middle-aged, paunchy, balding lawyer who had escorted her to Jane's wedding and reception. "The bride looks lovely, just like her mother." "Thank you, Carl. You're sweet, and thanks for the wine." He was a kind man, and she could imagine marrying him if he was interested, but he definitely wasn't Max. She couldn't help but glance across the room at Max. Max had just returned from a mountaineering trip to Nepal, and Camila thought he looked like one of those bronze Greek god statues. Tanned, incredibly fit, even more handsome than she remembered. He was smiling and laughing with Joan and her boyfriend, holding hands with a woman as beautiful and fit as he was. Joan had told her that Max met the woman on another mountaineering trip in South America, and they had been traveling, sailing, and climbing together for several months. Camila felt sick just thinking about it. "Camila?" Carl tried to get her attention. "Yes, Carl?" "Camila, I think we should leave. You've fulfilled your duties as mother of the bride, and staying here, drooling over your ex-husband, isn't doing you any favors, and I dare say, it's not very good for our relationship either. Carl, you're sweet, and you're absolutely right. Let me go say goodbye to my daughters, and we'll leave." Camila hugged and kissed her daughters, wished the newlyweds all the best, and as hard as it was, ignored Max and his stunning girlfriend. Max noticed Camila leaving and felt a slight pang of sadness for their old times together. As he watched her, Joan asked him a question. "Sorry, Joni, what were you saying?" "Daddy, remember that strange-looking gold Mercedes you were driving when you, Jane, and I had breakfast that morning, when you visited us at Duke? What happened to that car?" "Ah, Joni, that's a whole story I won't bore you with. Let's just say I borrowed that weird gold Mercedes from a friend and ended up giving it back to her. I think she sold it. It was truly an unlucky car." And Max turned to his friend to discuss their next mountain trip,